There was intrigue at the White House last night having nothing to do with the Alabama special election. We learned that former apprentice contestant and White House aide Omarosa Manigault-Newman has stepped down. The White House says she resigned to pursue other opportunities, but there is more here. All day, we've been hearing reports that she was forcibly removed from the White House, that she shouted vulgarities at Chief of Staff John Kelly. NBC News has not been able to confirm those accounts, but a White House official says the president talked to Omarosa today by phone, and they had a, quote, nice conversation. Nick Confessori.
Well, it was never clear exactly what her job was, and now it's clear what her job isn't. She is no longer in the White House, and some of the reporting today has been kind of boggling. There was a report from April Ryan, who's a White House correspondent, who said that she tried to push her way into the residence to plead her case with the presidents directly, and that the chief of staff had to eject her from the White House grounds. It's a very strange thing to see happen in any White House, even this one.
I worked there 6 years, never saw anybody removed from the residence. My thanks to Bill Crystal, Nick Confessori, and Doug Thornell. That does it for our hour. I'm Nicole Wallace. MTP Daily starts with Chuck glaring at me for the 8, 9, 10 seconds I've stolen from him. Hi, Chuck.
Oh, hi. Look, I'm all for you doing Omarosa.
Now you don't have to.
Now I don't have to.
It happened in your hour, technically.
Oh, that's right.
This was a rebuke of a candidate.
Well, I'm certainly glad that Roy Moore lost.
I'm really, really happy with what happened for all of us. I thought it was a great night for America.
Joining me now is Joan Walsh, National Affairs Correspondent at The Nation. Jess McIntosh with, I think, a big smile. Executive Editor Cher Blue, former Hillary Clinton campaign advisor, as well as Neera Tanden, a president and CEO of the Center for American Progress, a former senior advisor to President Obama, as well as Secretary Clinton. Going around the horn, what did last night mean? What happens next? Jess first.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I have a big smile. It was a wonderful night for Democrats, and as Republican Senator Bob Corker said, a wonderful night for America. But I think it also really matters what happened on the other side, which was that Donald Trump and Steve Bannon and Mitch McConnell cemented the Republican Party as a safe space for pedophiles. They don't get to walk that back now that they lost their gambit. That's something that's going to follow them through 2018 and probably for the rest of their careers and lives.
Neera.
Well, I thought it was an incredible victory. Obviously, I think the fact that you had African Americans and millennials really turn out shows that, people are tired of the daily, almost hourly assaults on the dignity of their fellow Americans and are going to come out to the ballot box. I also think that Republicans who wake up today and think the answer to their problems is to jam through an incredibly unpopular tax bill, one of the most unpopular bills we've ever seen, are not understanding what's happening in America. This is a rejection of not just people, but the policies of the Republican Party. Moderate women came forward as well and said enough is enough. But also, this tax plan wasn't helping galvanize Republicans for them. Donald Trump told them every day, vote against Doug Jones because he won't support the tax plan. Well, that did not work in the conservative state of Alabama.
You make two great points that I want to get to, Neera. I mean, number one, the Trump closing argument was taxes. The Doug Jones closing argument was CHIP, children's health care, paying for people, among other things. And he brought it up again in speech last night. So, and then you mentioned who powered the victory, this multiracial coalition, one that Senator-elect Jones was calling a coalition of dignity. So getting to both those points, first let me show Senator Warren to Joan Walsh here. Senator Warren talking about the tax point Neera just raised.
We believe that no middle-class family in this country should have to pay more in taxes so that giant corporations and billionaires can pay less. Are you ready to tell Mitch McConnell no vote on the Republican tax scam until Doug Jones takes his seat in the Senate? No vote! No!
Well, there needs to be a lot more of that, Ari, because I really think that Mitch McConnell is just going to power through and vote without Doug Jones in the Senate, which is really awful. Harry Reid waited for Scott Brown from Massachusetts to be seated before the next vote on the ACA. There's so much precedent for waiting. It's a clear mandate. They clearly have a senator, and the idea that Mitch McConnell just thinks he can shrug it off and keep Luther Strange in there so he has a Republican vote, despite what the voters of Alabama said, is really troubling to me. And yet, this is what we saw last year, and I feel like. If I have one regret about last year, I really wish I'd made a bigger deal from my particular pulpit about Merrick Garland and about the shocking breach of norms and decorum and fairness and not rules, because he did it. And this is the same kind of thing, to steal a Supreme Court seat from Barack Obama and now to steal a Senate seat from the people of Alabama and leave a guy in there who's probably going to vote, who is going to vote for this awful tax
Right, and
bill.
because you mentioned rules, I mean, Neera, this is a seat that was vacated because Jeff Sessions joined the administration, and so the people of Alabama got a choice. They made that choice last night. There isn't a great procedural or legitimacy argument I'm aware of about delaying that governing. The other point to put up as promised, if I make a promise, Neera, to revisit both of your points, I'm going to try to do it, was the coalition. So putting it up on the screen for your analysis, 58% of women going for Doug Jones in Alabama, a key margin for him. 96% of African Americans in Alabama, Neera.
Yeah, and African Americans, women, were actually the strongest vote. I think this is a critical issue. We saw a massive gender gap in Virginia, and we did see a massive gender gap in Alabama. Women are coming out strong. Now, that is powered by women of color, particularly African American women. But white women are switching away from the Republican Party. They are disgusted. I think they are disgusted by both the policies and the people. I mean, obviously, Roy Moore's personal behavior, the fact that he was, a child molester was a point by which people wouldn't go beyond. But what's pathetic, just truly pathetic, is the Republican Party made a decision for like a week that he was beyond the pale and then decided to go and fund him. And I think Jess is right. You cannot live that decision down. This is something they're going to own. They're going to try and act like they never did it. It was some kind of brief moment in time. But I think women are going to remember which party stood up and which party sat down on this kind of issue.
And Jess, I think the point Neera raises there is what closes the circle, because Donald Trump doubled down on Roy Moore and said, yes, this is the future of the Republican Party. Didn't have to do it, chose to do it. He also chose the day of this race yesterday to make those attacks on Senator Gillibrand, which, again, it's a weird world we live in, but we're a day out from it, and you could move on from it. And I think it's striking the parts of the country that are saying, no, we need a reckoning for that, too. And it's an issue that's literally difficult, I think, as a journalist to cover, because you don't want to give a ton of airtime to what the president said about a sitting U.S. senator, but you don't want to ignore it either. I'm reading now from USA Today, not known as a liberal bastion, but they write, quote, I'm reading a quote, a president who'd all but call a senator a whore is unfit to clean toilets in Barack Obama's presidential library or to shine George W. Bush's shoes. Jess.
Yeah, I completely agree with the editorial board of the USA Today. I think that we're only going to see this rift get even wider as Republicans seem intent on doubling down on alienating every single possible woman that they can here. I'm not sure why they think that is a winning strategy, especially as we are coming into 2018 with more women candidates than ever on the ballot. But I think that, women and African American women are the backbone of the Democratic Party. They keep showing that. They're showing up in bigger numbers than ever before, and they're delivering wins. When it comes to Donald Trump versus women, women beat him. I know that is really, really difficult for him to understand, but he doesn't have a good track record here, aside from his own election. And I think, frankly, we're starting to see the backlash to the fact that was allowed to happen.
Well,
I think you're going to see more DOJ calls. This is his comeuppance is coming also.
Let me take that to Joan, which sometimes there's a saying in television of a tease, where we tease ahead to something later in the show. And Jess McIntosh is teasing something that I'm going to talk about in a special comment at the end of the show, which is that more people did vote for the woman and the man. More people did vote for the Democrat
Last
than the
year.
Republican
Yes, let's
last
always
year.
remember that.
Which is a huge statement about where America was, which is
Right.
separate from the particular rules of the Electoral College that was set up 200 plus years ago. So take us home, as we would say at a concert, for our final point here from Jess to you, that Donald Trump has lost to women. He lost in a big way in the popular vote. And in a way, I think the argument here is, yes, Doug Jones happens to be a white man with a good record on choice, on feminism, on civil rights, on voting rights, on prosecuting KKK. Right. So the identity politics aren't just about what you look like, are they? Maybe they're also about what you stand for.
What you stand for, absolutely. It's not about what you look like, and I think it's really important to remember that. The resistance is powered by female anger and pain. Donald Trump did lose to Hillary Clinton in the popular vote last year. He got elected. He's in the White House, despite 16 and maybe now it's 18 women with credible sexual harassment or assault claims against him. That was really intolerable for a lot of us, and that's what you're seeing now. My favorite, I'm sad for my white sisters because once again, we did vote for the Republican. However, the best number I heard today is that Mitt Romney won white college-educated women 5 years ago by 55 points. Roy Moore won them by 11. So there has been a huge sea change, even if they haven't totally shifted into our column. So the women have powered the resistance. They will power it again in 2018, and anybody who ignores that will be sorry.
Joan, Jess, and Neera, on a big night to take it all in, thank you for being part of the Beats coverage. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up ahead, there is an Alabama hangover for some Republicans in particular, with knives coming out publicly for that man, Steve Bannon. And one day after Donald Trump's lawyer calls for a second special counsel, Republicans unloaded on Mueller today, but you'll never believe who had his back. I'm going to show you that. And later, Donald Trump Jr. was testifying, did you know this, for hours today to Russia investigators about some key questions. I've got prosecutors to dig into that. I'm Ari Melber. You're watching The Beat on MSNBC. Big night in American politics here. And the other fallout from Alabama there is about the road ahead. This roiling GOP civil war on Steve Bannon pushing the party so far right that they lost a safe red seat.
What about Steve Bannon? Was there a message to Steve Bannon? He was very...
He surely didn't win.
Steve Bannon went 100% behind this guy.
This is what happens when Republicans don't stick together.
I don't think Steve Bannon adds anything positive at all to the dialogue in the country. He looked like some disheveled drunk that wandered in off the street. To have him become the face of politics or to have a major voice in politics, I think is wrong. I think we should shun him. I think we should cut him off.
Shun him. But this debate's not about who should be just shunned or snubbed at a holiday party. It's about defining the boundaries of a conservative political project, which is now under strain in red Alabama. Consider that Democrat Doug Jones outperformed the Democrats' presidential ticket not by a few points or 10 points, but by 16 points. It may not be a fluke. Since Trump elections, there have been elections in 7 states, including Alabama, and every one, even one when Republicans won some of them, Democrats were outperforming the 2016 results. I'm going to dig into the politics on that with my panel in a moment. But first, I am joined by Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut in a body that has just added a Democrat. I want you to give it to me straight, Senator. We always expect the truth from you. A year ago, would you have thought we would be talking about a new Democrat joining your Senate caucus from Alabama?
No way. No way I would have predicted a lot that has happened in this very, very unpredictable year, but last on the list would have been a Democratic senator from the state of Alabama. And I think it is a stunning testament to the fall of Donald Trump, or at least his process of falling in many, many parts of the country that voted for him last time.
So you say it's partly the rejection of Trumpism. I just showed the Republicans' concern about Bannon, someone who initially was not considered fit to work in a White House by many people, many Democrats raising those issues, as you know. Walk us through how much of this was a rejection of that, how much of it was a potential embrace of Doug Jones, and then to the issues. Taxes, and should there be this vote without him? Chip, which I mentioned he campaigned on. Where do you see all this going?
Well, first point is Doug Jones is a supremely well-qualified candidate. I know of his record intimately because both of us served as United States attorneys, and he has tremendous, well-justified admiration as a public servant, as well as someone of integrity, which, of course, Roy Moore utterly lacked. If you were to select someone far down the list in terms of integrity, quality, basic ethical standards, someone who was removed twice from the state Supreme Court, you would have picked Roy Moore. But beyond that question now is the very relevant one that you've just raised. The people of Alabama deserve to have a voice and a vote from a senator they elected, not from a gubernatorial appointed one. And that's why we have called on Mitch McConnell to delay the tax vote and to enable Doug Jones to also push for the children's health insurance program, a major issue in that campaign of concern to the people of Alabama. And he should be given the opportunity to vote.
And that's something we're going to keep tracking because it is the big economic debate in town right now. Senator Blumenthal, thanks for making time for us.
Thank you.
And now, as promised, I turn the conversation to lawyer Maya Harris, who was a former senior policy advisor to the Hillary Clinton campaign, and Max Boot, former advisor to John McCain's presidential campaign, and writes in a new piece about Republican struggles with this Russia probe, saying the GOP has made it clear it is committed not to the rule of law, but to the rule of Trump. He is also a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Maya, beginning with you, how big is this for Democrats as a template?
This has been a huge election just yesterday, but when you put it in the bigger scheme of things and look at what the trend has been, what we have is a situation where Democrats are literally supercharged and Republicans have a kind of malaise that's setting in. They're losing ground with college-educated white voters. And when you look at the last two election cycles, two consecutive elections, you wouldn't find a more quantitative and qualitative rejection of the kind of Trump-Bannon vision of America. Both, when you look in November, the young people who were elected, the diverse group of people who were elected, and just this last election cycle.
And this is not symbolic. That when you go from 52 to 51, you're getting pretty close to 50 and 49 in a Senate that's got a lot of Trump issues on the agenda, which of course brings up the question of free-range chicken. What am I talking about? Well, that's how Senator John Kennedy explained what is at stake and what happens when you get closer to 50. Take a listen.
I wouldn't read too much into it. I mean, obviously, you'd rather have 52 votes than 51 because you can lose an extra free-range chicken. But we'll make it work.
How much, Maya, danger is there when you count these votes in the Senate that you do have these free-range chickens, to use the senator's term, and I guess they go walking off away from McConnell, and that means you don't pass your Trump bills?
Well, that's what we've seen this entire cycle. I mean, there hasn't been yet a single major legislative achievement despite unified government. Now they've lost one more seat. The Republicans are in complete disarray, and I think that what we're going to see going into 2018 is it's very likely now that they've lost one more seat that they're not going to be able to have many, if any, legislative achievements to show to the voters. And when you look, what they tried to do with health care, that was rejected on the ballot in November of 2017. And their tax plan is wildly unpopular.
Right. So it might be good for the chicken because it gets to walk around. It's not good if you're trying to control the chickens. Max Boot, you have been exploring the real tensions undergirding this Republican Party with a leader in Donald Trump who isn't just, skirting the law and these euphemisms you hear, but is really flouting it. And his embrace of Roy Moore was someone who literally was willing to lose his judgeship over violating the law. I mean, I was covering Roy Moore, I don't know, as the kids say, back before it was cool, and he was just someone who you couldn't trust to be a judge because Republican judges had to remove him because he wouldn't follow the rules. Put this Roy Moore rejection in the context of what you've been writing about, which is rule of law in today's Republican Party.
Well, you know, Ari, I'm glad you put it the way you put it and putting the finger on Donald Trump, because what bothers me is that a lot of Republicans are trying to make Steve Bannon the fall guy for what happened here. And believe me, I think that, you know, Steve Bannon is a loathsome human being and a malign influence in American politics, but he did not make 90% of Republicans vote for Donald Trump. He did not make 91% of Republicans in Alabama vote for Roy Moore. He did not force these Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee today to make these specious offensive charges against Robert Mueller to essentially justify the firing of the special counsel by Donald Trump. This is not all Steve Bannon's fault. Steve Bannon is more a symptom than a cause of what ails the Republican Party. And I'm afraid there's a deep, deep sickness in the Republican Party that causes them to put forward candidates like Roy Moore and Donald Trump and many others, and causes them to have this assault on the rule of law, which they are engaging in now by raising one ridiculous charge after another against Robert Mueller. There is something deeply wrong with this party. And, you know, I was a Republican for my entire adult life until last November. But now I have to say I devoutly hope that every single Republican running for election next November loses, because we cannot count on this Republican Party to hold the Donald Trumps of the world accountable. They have just shown that they have no willingness to uphold the Constitution and their oaths of office. So the only way we're going to get accountability in Washington is by electing Democrats. And I don't care if I may disagree with them on a few other issues. The Democrats are sound on the #1 issue that we face, which is the threat to America and the world from our own president.
Wow. And Max, you are making such an important point, because in the narrow politics of the day after Alabama, there are people who might focus on or rejoice around Steve Bannon perhaps finally getting his. You're saying be careful, because you think that's actually a ploy to distract from what you call the real accountability moment that Republicans should have for Trump.
Absolutely. I mean, sure. I mean, Steve Bannon is a bad guy, but you know, that's a way for Republicans on Capitol Hill to basically deflect from their own blame as enablers of Donald Trump, and the fact that so few of them were even willing to speak up against Roy Moore. I mean, I have to give kudos to Senator Shelby, who did yeoman work on Sunday by blasting at Moore, but so few other Republicans were willing to come out. The RNC went in lockstep with Donald Trump to support this accused child molester. And, you know, Roy Moore, at the end of the day, he probably would have won if it hadn't been for the child molestation charges. I mean, the fact that he is opposed to the rule of law, that he, you know, wants to criminalize homosexuality, that he thinks America is a font of evil in the world, that he thinks that slavery was the good old days. All this stuff wouldn't have been held against him in the end by the voters of Alabama. So, you know, I'm very glad that Roy Moore lost, and I'm very glad that Steve Bannon was embarrassed. But let's not pretend that all of a sudden this one victory has solved the deep, deep sickness that plagues today's Republican Party.
You make such an important point, particularly about the 48+% of Alabamans who still stood by what you detail there, that lawless and well-documented record. Max Boot and Maya Harris, thank you both.
Thank you.
Ahead, Alabama and the African-American vote. How did Jones actually exceed Obama's turnout records? And the day after Donald Trump's lawyer pushes for a new special counsel, a person who actually hired Mueller defending him in an important hearing today. And Donald Trump Jr. behind closed doors on the Hill again, that secret meeting with Russians. And later, my special breakdown of what else you need to know about Alabama tonight. Now, this was interesting. The argument against claims of bias against Bob Mueller and against firing Bob Mueller was made on Capitol Hill today by Donald Trump's hand-picked acting attorney general for the Russia probe, Rod Rosenstein. Jeff Sessions' deputy, who you probably have seen by now, is the top cop for Russia because of Sessions' recusal. And today, he backed Mueller up, all the while as Republicans attacked him. This, before the hearing, the DOJ had released anti-Trump text messages from an FBI agent whom Mueller removed from his team.
Sent between August 2015 and December 2016, most were exchanged before either party secured its nominee. But many of them were harshly critical of Donald Trump. One sent by Page to Strzok, March 2016, reads, "God, Trump is a loathsome human." In other messages, the couple shared pro-Clinton views, Strzok telling Page, "God, Hillary should win 100 million to nothing." When Mueller learned of the emails last summer, he removed Strzok from the team.
Government employees are allowed to text their political views, but Mueller removed him there for any appearance of bias. Several Republicans raised those texts today, as well as other reports to call for a second special counsel.
The elements necessary to ask for a special prosecutor to, in fact, see what was done wrong already exist.
While we continue to call on you to appoint a second special counsel, as you are aware, we have also opened our own joint investigation.
The country thinks we need a second special counsel. 20 members of this committee, the Judiciary Committee with primary jurisdiction over the Justice Department, thinks we need a second special counsel. What kind of text message did you have to see before you say it's time for a second special counsel?
These calls coming just a day after Trump lawyer Jay Sekulow also made that call for a second special counsel while insisting it had nothing to do with Bob Mueller or Bob Mueller's team. I'm joined by Matt Miller, former chief spokesman for the Justice Department, and Richard Painter, White House ethics lawyer under George W. Bush. Richard, is there, under the requirements, just so people understand the law, any basis for a second special counsel?
Well, I'd be tempted to appoint a second special counsel and investigate why the members of Congress are covering for President Trump on the Russia investigation. I mean, this is a serious threat to our national security, what happened in 2016, and this investigation needs to go forward. There's just absolutely no credible argument that Robert Mueller or anyone now on his staff has violated any ethics rules and that they've done anything other than conduct this investigation professionally. President Trump feels threatened by it for obvious reasons. His son-in-law and maybe his son are in trouble. I have no idea why members of Congress are fronting for the president here. Does he have something over them? What's going on? We have a Republican Deputy Attorney General who has to defend a Republican. Robert Mueller's a Republican. He was the head of the FBI when I was in the George W. Bush White House, and has to defend him against these ridiculous attacks by Republican members of Congress who I would think would have no dog in the hunt unless they've got something going on with the Russians. So
right, and it's
I don't know. I don't understand any of this.
And it's not clear whether this is a shift in the winds because of an actual goal, meaning they want to do something to the way the Russia probe functions, or simply a craven political desire, Matt Miller, to appear to match what is now being dialed up and said in conservative media. You worked for Eric Holder, who was lightning rod for some conservatives, and I don't think there was ever substantiated evidence that they wanted actually to change a lot of things. They wanted to just get on record. I mean, they famously held him in contempt, which didn't actually do anything in government, but it put them on record. So with that in mind, Matt, take a look at this exchange today where what you get from a Republican is teeing up an answer that helps Bob Mueller because Donald Trump's handpicked Deputy Attorney General says Bob Mueller's doing A-OK.
Why, after you've heard all the concerns expressed here today, why are you satisfied with the course of the investigation so far?
I'm satisfied, Congressman, because based upon what I know, which is different from what accounts may appear in the media, based upon what I know, I believe Director Mueller is appropriately remaining within his scope and conducting himself appropriately.
And Matt Miller, I mean no insult to Rod Rosenstein when I will translate the boring speak of a lawyer there to say when he says, unlike what's in the media, I know Mueller on the facts to be doing well. What he's saying is, don't believe Sean Hannity. He's wrong.
Yeah, that was a very important statement for the Deputy Attorney General to make. Look, I don't think there's any doubt what the Republicans in Congress are doing here, what Fox News is doing here, what the White House is doing here. They are setting the table for Bob Mueller to either be fired or to be ignored if he concludes that the president violates the law. That's what all of these attacks on the Justice Department, on the FBI, and on Mueller himself are all really about.
So, Matt, you don't think it is simply posturing at this juncture? You think they are trying to engineer and rig the game for later?
I think that's absolutely right. And it may not be to support his firing. It may just be that if at the end of this investigation he concludes that the president broke the law and sends a report over to Congress, that they will have set the table so that enough voters, Republican voters, are convinced that Bob Mueller can't be trusted, that that report can be ignored. And I think that's why it was so important what Rod Rosenstein said today. Look, when you have Republicans doing this to undermine the rule of law, it's one thing for Democrats to defend Bob Mueller, and they need to do that. It's more important that other Republicans stand up for him. And Rod Rosenstein is a high-profile Republican who I don't think has always necessarily handled this investigation in the past. I think his handling of the Comey firing was a huge mistake. But he did today what Jeff Sessions has been unwilling to do, and that's defend the work of the career men and women in the department and defend Bob Mueller.
You make a great point on that contrast. And Richard Painter, the final question to you is, while federal employees and FBI agents have the right to talk politics. It's not necessarily a fireable offense. What do you say to the concern here raised by Republicans and other outside groups that it does look bad for them to be privately trashing candidate Trump?
Well, I don't understand that. We have many people who are appointed as United States attorneys who were pro-Trump. And we have many people in the Justice Department who are pro-Trump. The fact that there might actually be some lawyers out there, I believe there are quite a few, who has serious concerns about Donald Trump and his approach to the rule of law going back to 2015, 2016 when he was a candidate. That's
just very important to get this vote.
Okay, but that bill, the one that the president and his allies and his party are counting on to turn their political fortunes around, it is now more unpopular than any tax bill passed in the last 4 decades. It's somehow, remarkably, even more unpopular than past tax hikes. Yet another example of what you might call this president's reverse Midas touch. In just 10 short months, he's managed to do to the Republican Party exactly what he did to his Atlantic City casinos, turning the GOP from a successful enterprise with a governing majority into a morally and politically bankrupt shell of its former self. For more on Republicans' Day of Reckoning, I'm joined now with Congressman Keith Ellison, Democrat from Minnesota, the deputy chair of the DNC. Let me read a tweet that caught my eye that you tweeted last night. Trump backed Luther Strange, and he went down. Then backed his bird of a feather friend, Roy Moore. He just went down. Don't fear these people. They are beatable. What do you mean?
Well, I mean that if we organize, that if we tap the local talent as we did in Alabama, then what will happen is that we're going to win elections. The Democratic Party cannot lay on its laurels. We have to actually be active and engaged in local community organizing. You know, we knocked over on 300,000 doors in Alabama. We put about $1 million into that state, and we worked really hard. And as a result of Moore and Trump's unpopularity and our hard work, we pulled off a pretty remarkable situation.
So you say don't fear these people, and I think by and large the way the Democrats on Capitol Hill particularly have behaved is not afraid of the president. I mean, you could have imagined a scenario in which you got Democratic votes for the ACA repeal. I don't think he's going to get any Democratic votes on the tax bill, even coming out of conference, right? So the people who seem scared of the president, Republicans, frankly, does that change now?
You know, I think that it does. I think that one of the things that many people, even some Democrats, have been reluctant to really criticize Trump. They didn't want to so-called resist, right? They wanted to just talk about an affirmative positive program, which I think is good. But the point is, Trump now really is not to be feared by anyone. And if Trump tries to fire Mueller, if Trump fails on his promise to do something about DACA, if he goes in there and passes this horrendous tax bill, I think that Republicans should not walk over the cliff with him. They should say, look, man, this is a bad thing for me in my district. I got to face my own voters. I'm not walking over the cliff with you.
So far, though, the thinking has been, in the words of Ben Franklin, we must hang together or surely we will hang separately. They have been united essentially behind this agenda.
True.
Do you think that continues now? I was in that city that you're in right now, the day after Scott Brown won, and I remember talking to Democratic members of Congress I ran into on the street who looked like they got hit in the head with a frying pan and were ready to pack it in. But that's not my sense of how Republicans are today in the Capitol, or maybe I'm wrong.
Well, you know, if you saw the House Judiciary Committee and the way that Republicans raked Rod Rosenstein over the coals, you're right. They seem pretty emboldened, even though their numbers are pretty bad and they just took a big loss in Alabama. They don't seem to be catching the drift of the American people. But, you know, but we do. We get where the American people are. And I will say this, Chris, you know, Alabama has a average income that's about $11,000 a year lower than the national average. You go into that state and talk to people about raising their pay, cutting their costs, building a retirement, making a future for their kids, and you can win. If you bring that message to people, to their doorsteps, you can win. That's why, you know, I'm so kind of excited about it. I know that, you know, this Alabama was somewhat of an anomaly because Moore was so bad. But you know what? We put a blueprint on the ground that I think we can carry to a lot of places.
All right, Congressman Keith Ellison, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Chris.
Mickey Edwards, the former Republican congressman from Oklahoma, a co-founder of the Heritage Foundation. Mona Charen is a conservative author and columnist, a former White House aide under President Ronald Reagan. And Mickey, let me start with you. There is a lot of blame gaming this morning. This is McConnell's deputy, Josh Holmes, said this: if you take the 5 best consultants in politics and tell them to lose the Alabama Senate race, I'm not sure they could do it. And this is what Peter King had to say about Steve Bannon. Take a listen.
I don't think Steve Bannon adds anything positive at all to the dialogue in the country. I don't know who would identify with him. And to see him on the stage this week with the big American flag behind him, he looked like some disheveled drunk that wandered in off the street. To have him become the face of politics, to have a major voice in politics, I think is wrong. I think we should shut him. I think we should cut him off. And I'd say this whether it's a Democrat or a Republican.
So who's to blame, Mickey, for what's happened to your party?
The party. For one thing, you said, Chris, that the president is sort of leading them off the cliff. No, I mean, they're jumping off the cliff. And it was the Republican National Committee that went into Alabama and inexplicably put money into the race to help elect somebody who has been credibly accused of child molestation, and even before that had said that his personal religious beliefs trump the Constitution. So the party is doing that to itself, and it's more suicide. Trump is not killing it. Trump is a symptom. There's a lot wrong in the party. And back in the day when I was getting started, when it was people like Ronald Reagan would have gagged at the idea of having a Steve Bannon or a Roy Moore representing the Republican Party, or a Donald Trump.
Mona, do you agree with that idea that this Trump is a symptom rather than a cause here?
Well, it's both. There are feedback mechanisms so that Trump is terrible and then he makes the existing problems worse. But look, I can remember the days when you could take seriously people who called themselves the Christian Coalition or the moral majority and know that they had legitimate points of view and that they were really, truly trying to stand up for character and integrity in public life. And now they have covered themselves in disgrace. They have Jerry Falwell Jr. and Tim Wildman and a number of others got behind Roy Moore. I think it's only fair to say that there were a number of Republicans who didn't. So let's make sure we give credit to Cory Gardner and Mitt Romney and Mitch McConnell and many others who did treat him as toxic and radioactive. But no, I do agree that the problems run very deep in this party. The movement, Eric Hoffer said every movement eventually becomes a business and finally a racket. And among too many conservative interest groups, that's what's happened. It's all become about money.
Mickey, the point on Moore to me, and you referenced this and Mona did, I mean, even before the allegations, this is a person who's twice removed from the state Supreme Court of Alabama by Republicans. I mean, the other Republican justices who sit on that body who say this guy is lawless and unfit. So even before the Washington Post story, and my feeling is if you'll vote for Roy Moore, you'll vote for anyone. And that kind of feels like the problem of the Republican Party right now.
Well, it is the problem, and it's basically if you have an R after your name, and in the case of Roy Moore, he won the nomination, became the only Republican allowed to be on the ballot with the votes of 8% of the population of the state. So it's part of our political system that allows people like that to ascend and become the only nominee of their party that's allowed to be on the ballot. But the fact that somebody like Roy Moore could come forward, be the Republican nominee, and except for a few people, most of the Republicans in the House and the Senate remained quiet. They didn't support him, but you couldn't hear them, you couldn't hear a peep. And you have some reason why you are called upon when you take an office like being a member of the House, a member of the Senate in public life to take a moral stand and say this is not right. And the Republicans seem absolutely unwilling to do that.
Mona, do you think the Republicans in Washington understand the political peril they are currently in?
Up until quite recently, I haven't talked to them this morning, but up until quite recently, they've been pretty smug and saying, look, you know, we have 2/3 of the legislatures, and we have the presidency, we have the House, and we have the Senate. We're doing great. You know, and they would say, well, you know, Trump may have bad table manners, and you may find him a little distasteful, but hard to argue with success. And but to lose a seat in the reddest of red states, in Alabama, partly because of energized black turnout and partly because Republicans did not show up. They are discouraged and demoralized by that kind of a candidate, by that kind of politics, and that should be sending chills down the spines of many Republicans in Congress. It does not bode well for their fortunes in 2018 at all.
All right, Mickey Edwards and Mona Charen, appreciate your time tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Still to come, much more on the shocking win in Alabama and what it means to the Democratic Party in 2018. And next, reports of a dramatic exit of yet another White House staffer who allegedly tried to force her way into the White House residence after being fired. Omarosa's West Wing departure is everything you thought it might be in 2 minutes.
Every critic, every detractor will have to bow down to President Trump. It's everyone who's ever doubted Donald, whoever disagreed, whoever challenged him. It is the ultimate revenge to become the most powerful man in the universe.
Well, last night, as voters dealt President Trump an astonishing rebuke in Alabama, his longtime supporter, Omarosa Manigault, was reportedly trying to barge into the White House residence to plead for her job. April Ryan of American Urban Radio Network's reporting that Chief of Staff John Kelly told Manigault it was time for her to go. Wall Street Journal reported that Manigault's departure was abrupt, according to a White House official who said that Manigault was physically dragged and escorted off the campus. There are conflicting stories around the former Apprentice star's departure. The White House put out a brief statement saying that she resigned and their last day will be January 20th. One administration official told the Daily Mail that Manigault left because of the failed Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore, who said America was last great when it enslaved black people. Tonight, CBS News is reporting that Omarosa took her last-ditch appeal to reverse her dismissal all the way to the First Family.
Even went so far as to appeal to Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter, to ask to keep her job. She didn't get the answer she wanted. She then tried going into the White House residence, at which point she tripped the alarms. Now, presumably, she was going to try to speak to the president. What we know, though, is that in tripping the alarms, it did anger Chief of Staff John Kelly, who had her escorted out of the premises.
Regardless of who you believe, the list of White House departures was already long before today, very long, and now it's, amazingly, one name longer. Francesca Chambers, the reporter behind the Daily Mail story, MSNBC contributor Eli Stokols reported on Manigault's departure for the Wall Street Journal. I'll go to each of you in turn. Francesca, what have you heard about this departure?
Well, Chris, you were saying that it was everything you expected and more, much like a whole season of The Apprentice playing out in one day at the White House here. And so the difference between the two reports, from what was earlier reported and now what you were quoting on CBS and what we're hearing now, is it seems like the White House started the day letting her leave gracefully, saying, look, it was a resignation, she'll stay until January 20th. But then as it started to unfold a little bit more, we started to get some of these details about how she was allegedly escorted off of the premises and all of this other stuff. And now you have the Secret Service saying on Twitter, by the way, that they were not involved in escorting her off, but suggesting that she was, and they weren't also not involved in her termination. All they had to do with it was taking away her pass that grants her access to the complex. So confirming a lot there with this tweet that's denying they were involved in the escort.
Okay, that is a great point, because normally the Secret Service doesn't get involved in this sort of thing, but they did take this extraordinary step to tweet this today, saying that this reporting regarding Secret Service personnel physically removing Omarosa Manigault is incorrect. It was not involved in the termination process or the escort off the complex, which, to your point, Francesca, is kind of a confirmation that did happen. Eli, why did it happen now?
Oh, I don't know what brought this to a head. John Kelly, the White House chief of staff, ever since taking over, our reporting is that he had her in his sights, that he felt that she was disruptive, didn't really understand why she was there making $180,000 a year, thought that she was one of the people who would walk into the Oval Office and say something to the president, and he'd wind up down a rabbit hole. So John Kelly wanted to curtail that. He has done so. She's complained, we understand, about limiting the limited access that she's had since Kelly has been there. And this came to a head. He decided, I guess, that her last day was going to be January 20th. And our reporting is that that wasn't good enough for her. She was upset about that, tried to go talk to the president himself in the residence. Generally, somebody who's happy to be leaving a job doesn't try to storm the White House residence and, convince the president to give that job back. And as Francesca pointed out, the Secret Service does in that tweet confirm that somebody who the White House is telling us is supposed to be working there until January 20th no longer has access to the facility.
Omarosa's is one of the people who have left early. If we could put that graphic back up. I mean, Francesca, this is a remarkable amount of turnover for a White House at this point. Some of the highest profile people, the chief of staff, Reince Priebus, and Steve Bannon, of course, and Michael Flynn, who subsequently pleaded guilty to a felony. You have just this wide array of people. Anthony Scaramucci, of course, is very, 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 very short tenure. And you have Sean Spicer, you have Seb Gorka, and on it goes. It has a real impact in the functioning of the nerve center of a nuclear power that's also the most powerful government on earth.
Well, and also we've now learned that Dina Powell will be leaving at the beginning of the year, and she's the president's deputy national security advisor. But I was also told today by a senior official that there will be an exodus at the beginning of the year that extends beyond that. In addition to Omarosa Manigault and Dina Powell, at least 4 other officials are expected to leave, I was told, at the beginning of the year. And that really confirms other reporting that we've heard, that there would be a mass exodus of Trump administration officials. And as you're saying, we're only 1 year, we're not even 1 year in, but we'll only be 1 year in. Look at all the people who've departed, and now there's reporting that there will be more.
I genuinely, Eli, wonder how that place functions.
Well, you cover it every day, and you see that sometimes it functions and sometimes it really doesn't function all that well. And part of that is the fact that these people came into office. A lot of them were not anticipating that they would win the transition. They were basically flat-footed. They threw out the work Chris Christie did on the transition, and they brought all the people who were involved in the campaign into the administration, many of whom did not really have the baseline level of experience that you would expect for a lot of these positions. And so that is a reason for a lot of the chaos and a lot of the turnover. And, a lot of the positions, especially at the agencies, have just remained unfilled for the first year. We talk about the State Department. We've seen people leaving the EPA. A lot of these agencies, they are not staffed the way they normally are. So what you see on the whole is an administration, a president, a little more indifferent to government and less trusting of the federal bureaucracy and not really interested in populating it. And, they sometimes, may turn out that they've done that at their peril.
We should note the one place they've been very successful is the federal judiciary, although there's some news on that tonight, which is Brett Talley, someone we've covered here, unanimously rated not qualified by the ABA. It looks like he will be withdrawing his nomination. Another loss from a gentleman from Alabama, 2 in one 24-hour period of time. Francesca Chambers and Eli Stokols, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Coming up, Republicans today showed the lengths they will go in attempting to delegitimize Robert Mueller and his investigation. You have to hear it for yourself. Do not go away.
Turn up your swagger game with One-A-Day Men's. A complete multivitamin with key nutrients plus B vitamins for heart health. Your One-A-Day is showing.
I'm Jillian, and I have a confession to make. I may have been a little tough in my past. Down! Up! Go! Go! But now I've found my bubbly side with SodaStream, the effortless way to stop addiction to sugary soda. Just slip in a bottle of regular tap water, a quick push, and in seconds, plain boring water is sparkling. Add a little fruit drop flavor, and boom, a sparkling treat you'll want to drink. With soda, with SodaStream.
Available at GetSodaStream.com or at these fine retailers.
Sam, why is your head covered in bubble wrap?
Because I'm not covered in life insurance.
You should check out PolicyGenius.com. They compare all the best insurers to help you find the right policy. So it's super easy, unlike this. Compare and save with PolicyGenius.com.
Morning Joe speaks truth to power.
Republicans know what's going on in this White House.
Is there a calm before the storm?
With access to the people who matter.
Do you view that as a threat to the First Amendment?
From the halls of Congress to the Oval Office.
American democracy is at risk.
Morning Joe, weekdays 6 to 9 on MSNBC.
Do you feel that the outcome means that the voters believed you and the other accusers?
I do feel like it helped. I really do. I'm very excited over that because, you know, there's no reason for me to go and lie on television when this was, you know, the truth from day one.
Roy Moore's stunning defeat last night was, in part, among other things, a referendum on how voters respond to evidence of sexually predatory behavior in the Me Too era. And Roy Moore is far from alone. Earlier today, Congressman Luis Gutierrez made a point of entering into evidence of predatory behavior by an even more prominent politician into the congressional record.
Put his hands under their clothes. At least 16 women have come forward to say that the President of the United States felt them up, kissed them without permission, put his hands under their clothing without permission, groped them, touched their genitalia, walked into dressing rooms unannounced to see them naked, and made other unwanted sexual advances that, to everyone, are clear violations of the law.
Gutierrez noted the president had admitted to some of this very behavior himself on Howard Stern and in the infamous Access Hollywood tape, and that other lawmakers had resigned for less.
We have women who were made to feel powerless and insignificant, who at great personal cost and risk have come forward. And I believe them. I do. Al Franken is resigning from the Senate. And it goes no further than this committee, where 2 senior members resigned because women came forward and made credible claims. That just happened last week.
That was one thing that happened at today's Judiciary Committee hearing. Another was an astonishing display on Republicans desperate to delegitimize Special Counsel Robert Mueller. That remarkable scene right after this.
Peter Strzok, who ran the Russian investigation.
For weeks, Fox News and conservative media have been making the case that it doesn't matter what Special Counsel Robert...
It seemed like a clear win, despite the fact that Doug Jones had declared victory, despite the fact that President Trump had even congratulated Doug Jones on his victory. Despite all of that, word came down that Roy Moore was not planning on conceding. Now, at around 11:30 Eastern last night, Roy Moore came out to address the people who remained at his very quiet headquarters. But he only came out to tell them that he was under the impression that this race was not over.
Realize when the vote is this close that it's not over. And we've still got to go by the rules about this recount provision. And the Secretary of State has explained it to us, and we're expecting that the press will go up there and talk to them to find out what the situation is. But we also know that God is always in control.
God may always be in control, but whether an election is over or not, whether there's going to be a recount or not, the way that God controls that, if God is controlling that, is with the number of votes you lose by. In refusing to concede last night, Roy Moore said something specific about why he wasn't conceding. He said his campaign was conferring with the Secretary of State about the recount provision. And after Roy Moore raised that possibility, that's when things got really weird, because the Alabama Secretary of State did then go on national television to try to explain to the country what the recount provision is in Alabama. And that exercise could not have been more awkward in the moment. But what the Secretary of State said, what he explained to the country, was also just totally legally wrong.
Kaylee Hartung from CNN is with the Secretary of State of Alabama, and maybe can help clear some of this up. Kaylee,
do you
go
want
ahead.
the shot when she starts?
Take it away, Kaylee Hartung.
Thank you, Jake. Secretary Merrill, Roy Moore, we just heard from him. He's on his way here. What do we need to understand about the conversation that will take place when he arrives?
I don't know that Judge Moore is coming here. I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting other people from the media to come here. I'm not very comfortable in visiting with Judge Moore or anybody in his campaign tonight.
So at this point, do you believe there is a chance of a recount?
Well, there's always a chance of a recount, because any candidate can ask for a recount, and if they pay for it, they can receive a recount.
That was the Alabama Secretary of State last night on CNN, explaining awkwardly in his own words what he believed to be the recount provision in Alabama. It's important because that's what Roy Moore is citing to explain why he is not conceding this race. I have to tell you, what the Secretary of State just said there about Alabama's recount provision is not true. Can we run that last little bit of tape just one more time?
Any candidate can ask for a recount, and if they pay for it, they can receive a recount.
That is not true as a matter of Alabama law. Under Alabama law, as explained in the Alabama election manual and as shouted from the rooftops by election expert Rick Hasen today, what he just explained there about getting a recount if you pay for it, that's only true if you run for state office in Alabama. That is not true if you are running for a federal office, like, say, U.S. Senator. So, confusion about the law has been a pronounced feature of the Roy Moore candidacy, and indeed his entire turn in public life. He has maintained, for example, that a person can be banned from public office on the basis of their religion, when he said Muslims shouldn't be allowed to serve in Congress. For example, he was twice thrown off the bench in Alabama for refusing to obey federal court orders because he thought he didn't need to. Well, arguably, there was also a legal misunderstanding at work when the Moore campaign seemed to imply that it was all right for a grown man to have sexual contact with a 14-year-old girl, provided the girl's parents handed her over to the grown man. I mean, there's been a lot of legal misunderstandings when it comes to the high points of the Moore candidacy. But right now, in the wake of this loss by Roy Moore, this stunning Democratic victory last night in Alabama, we are in sort of a weird legal situation because Roy Moore still isn't conceding. And he says he's not conceding because he believes he's entitled to pay for a recount in the race. And he says he believes that because he conferred with the Secretary of State. And it may be that the Secretary of State has told him that is the case. But the Secretary of State is wrong. I mean, had this race been closer than 0.5% between Doug Jones and Roy Moore, yes, there would have been an automatic recount paid for by the state. But Roy Moore lost by 3 times that margin to Doug Jones. And he can't just pay for a recount if he wants one. There's no provision for that in Alabama law. But the Secretary of State doesn't appear to know that. So what next? I mean, on its face, this race does appear to be over. It's just a matter of the state certifying the vote. But 22.5 hours on from that little kid dancing into my heart, there has been no concession from Roy Moore. And there's been no word from Roy Moore whatsoever. The Secretary of State has misstated the recount law in his own state on national television. And although this particular Secretary of State in Alabama makes a practice of frequently issuing clarifications on legal matters on his website and all sorts of election-related stuff, today he has apparently issued no clarification whatsoever. So it's this weird thing that's now sort of feels like background music to this big national story, right? There is this national furor and national excitement over what happened last night in Alabama. But technically, last night in Alabama is not settled if you ask one side in that contest. Now, that may end up having implications both in Alabama and in Washington, D.C. We're going to be talking about both of those prospects over the course of this hour tonight, which means we're going to be going back to Birmingham tonight. Alabama, I'm sorry, you are not yet free of the plague of national media that has descended upon you. In the wake of last night's shock results, the country has today learned a lot more about Doug Jones, this lifelong Alabamian Democratic prosecutor who beat Roy Moore last night. In the wake of last night's shock results, the Democratic Party has once again affirmed the importance and the centrality of the African-American community within the Democratic Electoral Coalition. In the wake of last night's shock results, the Republican Party has spent the day fighting about whose fault it is that Roy Moore was nominated in the first place, let alone that he was beaten in a state like Alabama. But in the wake of last night's shock results, the bigger electoral question, bigger political question for everybody after these results came in last night is, what does this mean about what's going to happen next? How worrying should last night's results be for the Republican Party going forward? I mean, it's one thing for them to be having their day-long recriminations today about what just happened and who's to blame and how terrible Steve Bannon is, right? It's one thing for them to talk about why this went wrong. It's another thing to try to figure out if what happened last night is foreshadowing about what's about to happen to the Republican Party over the next year and into the next elections and what may happen to the Trump presidency. Right? How worried are Republicans after last night? If you are trying to quantify that, if you're trying to figure out how to measure the amount of national Republican worry over the past 24 hours, there are a couple pieces of data that you should factor in there that did not get a lot of attention today, but that's what they mean, and we've got that next. Do you know about the other election that happened last night, other than the Doug Jones-Roy Moore race in Alabama? Obviously, a U.S. Senate race is always going to be a big deal, special election, but you know, there was also another one. There was a state Senate election last night in the great state of Iowa. In northwestern Iowa, a district that includes parts of Sioux City. It's a very, very Republican part of Iowa. It's a very Republican district. In that district, Republicans outnumber Democrats 2-1 among registered voters. Donald Trump's margin of victory over Hillary Clinton in that district was 41 points. Not that Trump got 41% of the vote. He got 41 points more than Hillary Clinton did. He just won there in a gigantic landslide. Well, last night, there was a special election to fill the seat from that district in the Iowa Senate. And a Republican still won, but that seat last night swung 31 points in the Democrats' direction compared to last November. And that kind of Democratic gain, a 31-point gain, it might be tempting to dismiss that as a political anomaly as well. I'm told the Democrats ran a particularly good and effective and well-known candidate in that race, but it turns out what happened in Iowa last night wasn't a one-off. There have been 4 contested special elections in Iowa since the 2016 election. Last night was a 31-point shift to the Democrats. The one before that was also a 31-point shift to the Democrats. The one before that was a 34-point shift to the Democrats. And the one before that was a 32-point shift to the Democrats. Now, I mean, some legislative districts, some congressional seats even in some states are going to be so partisan that that's, you know, still a comfortable margin for Republicans, right? There are some places that are going to lean so Republican that you can have a 32 or 34-point swing toward the Democrats and the Republican will still hold on to power. There are places like that, but there are not that many places like that. I mean, if you extrapolate dynamics like that to the whole country, 30, 32, 34-point swings, and not in just one night, like in every, that's the range of outcomes there have been in Iowa since the election, 4 different elections. Seeing the winds blowing in that direction, Texas Democrats yesterday announced that for the first time in years, they will run a Democrat to contest every single congressional seat in the Lone Star State in 2018. They don't usually do that. First time in 25 years. They're not doing it to make a point. They're doing that because they think they're going to win some of those seats, because they think the winds right now are blowing so hard in the Democratic Party's direction. Then, this morning, as the country was still absorbing the news that the number of Republicans in the U.S. Senate is going to go down to 51 because a Democrat is being added to the rolls from Alabama. What? As people were reading 3-inch headlines to that effect over their breakfast cereal all over the country today, Republicans got something else to worry about that is specific to the U.S. Senate. When Senator Al Franken announced that he would resign 6 days ago, we knew then that Democratic Governor Mark Dayton in Minnesota would have the opportunity to choose Al Franken's replacement in the Senate. And there were considerable worries in Democratic political circles that there were these initial reports that Mark Dayton's plan, his priority, was to pick somebody for the Franken seat who would be just a placeholder, a person who wouldn't run to hold on to that seat when it goes to the voters next November 2018 on Election Day. The reason that was worrying to Democratic political observers is because, frankly, incumbency helps. It's not everything. Just ask Luther Strange, right? But generally speaking, in the absence of some personal scandal affixed to that person, generally speaking, it's easier to hold on to a Senate seat that you already have than it is to win an open race for that seat. So, given the choice, why would Democrats only appoint a placeholder who's going to give the seat up, thus setting up their own party for what would certainly be a hotly contested Democratic primary to pick a new Democratic candidate to replace the appointee? And whoever won the primary would then have to run against a Republican in the general election in a state that's really purple right now, and that happens to have a lot of semi-popular, well-known retired Republicans who are sitting around being bored in their private sector jobs and who want to get back into the U.S. Senate. Why only appoint a placeholder? Well, this morning, Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton made his announcement that his appointee to fill the Al Franken seat in the Senate would be Minnesota's Lieutenant Governor, Democrat Tina Smith. Tina Smith has long experience in Minnesota state politics. She is apparently widely respected. She's definitely very well connected. But then she soon announced that she is not going to be a placeholder. Despite those early reports, Tina Smith says she will accept this appointment and then she will run to hold on to Franken's seat next year. So if you were tracking the Republican worry factor in the wake of the Roy Moore-Doug Jones race last night, if you're tracking that on a little gauge today, the little spike mid-morning when it went like this was when they found out the news about what's happening to Al Franken's seat. With somebody being appointed to hold that seat who could very plausibly win it in a general election, with somebody who's not just going to be a placeholder, as had been previously reported, that Al Franken seat is not nearly so up for grabs in 2018 as it seemed just one day ago. And then, as the day progressed, we got two other very blunt signs of Republican worry in the wake of Roy Moore's loss. Obviously, the Alabama loss was bad news, not just for the president's party, but for the president himself. That has implications in terms of his political power, right? President Trump had gone all in and campaigned for and endorsed and tried to get Virginia to elect Ed Gillespie. Went all in for Ed Gillespie to be Republican governor of Virginia. Ed Gillespie lost. Then the president endorsed and campaigned for and tried to elect Luther Strange in the Senate primary in Alabama. And Luther Strange lost. And then the president went all in and endorsed and campaigned for Roy Moore in the Senate election last night in Alabama. And Roy Moore, too, lost in Alabama to a Democrat. And for a president who doesn't come from his party in any real sense, who's not of and for the Republican Party and doesn't have a long track record there with the party and therefore hasn't built up a lot of trust and a lot of relationships with them, I mean, he doesn't really have independent powers of persuasion when it comes to his party on Republican policy issues. Really, the way that he gets his own way, the way that he gets his party to do what he wants in Washington is by them fearing or desiring his political power, right? When they fear his political power, they fear what it might mean to have the president against you. You know, for him to direct his followers or his loyalist media to criticize you. When the president has political juice, that means he has the ability to cause political outcomes. And the president's political juice is really all he's got in terms of getting Republicans in Washington to go along with him on anything. Well, his political juice is at a low ebb right now. And so as the results of Alabama's Senate election last night rolled into Washington like a fog, Republicans announced, coincidentally, that they are rejecting, they are pulling the plug on two of Trump's most embarrassing judicial nominees. When you have no fear of any political consequences that your president can rain down on you, you are less willing to do something embarrassing on his behalf, right? Like approve some of these lifetime appointment federal judge nominees who've never tried a case and who've been rated unqualified by the American Bar Association. Two of the president's most embarrassing judicial nominees, people who were viewed as the most blatantly embarrassing and unqualified for the job, got yanked today. They got yanked by the Republicans because Republican senators decided they were going to stop taking those particular risks for this particular president. Your favor, sir, is no longer worth it. The other sign of Republican worry today, and I will leave you with this, was the surprise news that they have moved up the speed by which they intend to pass their big tax bill. In terms of external constraints, there's no reason they need to be rushing to pass this, which would be the biggest change to the tax code in 30 years. There's no legislative deadline. There's nothing going on in the world that would require this to happen so fast. But nevertheless, today, surprise, within hours of the Roy Moore Senate race results being announced, Republicans rushed to the microphones to tell the media that they have a final version of their tax bill. They're ready to vote on it. They're ready to get it done. They appear to be rushing to do that for two sort of blatant reasons. First, they now want to vote on it before Democrat Doug Jones gets sworn in the Senate, so they can count on a Republican vote for their tax bill from Luther Strange before Luther Strange goes home to Alabama. But the other reason it seems they are rushing this thing is because this is what it looks like on Capitol Hill pretty much every day now. These were protesters today in the office of Alaska Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski. These were protesters today in the office of Kansas Republican Senator Jerry Moran. These were protesters today at the offices of Maine Senator Susan Collins. The only senator who got a different reception from these crowds of protesters on the tax bill today was Senator Bob Corker, who is, you can hear them here. Bob Corker is short, forgive me, so you can't see him walking through the middle of this crowd, but he happened to wander down this hallway while these people were at another senator's office protesting the tax bill. He voted against the tax bill in its first iteration, so Senator Corker in the hallway in the middle of all these protesters today was greeted with cries of, "Thank you. Thank you, Senator." I mean, the pressure on this tax bill is intense. It's not getting a lot of Beltway media coverage for some reason. But the protests against this tax bill are intense on Capitol Hill. They're also intense at the home offices of members of Congress and senators. The reconciled version that the Republicans announced today of their tax bill gives even more tax benefits to corporations and rich people than the last iteration of it that they voted on. So you can tell who they're really feeling the pressure from. But now they've decided they need to go even faster with it. When protesters today were leaving Lisa Murkowski's office, their chant at one point changed to this.
No Jones! No vote! No Jones! No vote! No Jones! No vote! No Jones!
What they're saying there is no Jones, no vote. In other words, stop rushing to get this done. Why are you pushing ahead with this? Doug Jones is going to be here soon enough to take a seat in the Senate. Let's see how he wants to vote on this. It was a nearly miraculous hard work miracle last night for Democrats in Alabama, but the Republican worry about the implications of what happened last night, that is something that Republicans are feeling coast to coast, and definitely in Washington, D.C. Just for a second, can we bring back the best thing that happened all night? Can we just bring it back? Come on, just put it back up. Come on, you guys have it. Yeah. Thank you, exuberant young person in Alabama politics. You were great to see last night. You are very strong. You are great to see again right now. Aside from this kid superhero, there is one more thing from Birmingham that you need to see about what happened last night, and we've got that for you next. Stay with us. Here in one map is how Doug Jones became a United States Senator last night. This map does not show that Alabama is a blue state. What this map actually shows is, county by county, the Democratic shift in voters in Alabama from the 2016 presidential election to the Senate special election that took place last night. So the darker the blue color in each of these counties, the more Democratic the vote was last night compared to what it was in the Trump-Clinton election in 2016. Every single county, right? I mean, the remarkable thing about this map is that regardless of how each of the two candidates last night did in any individual county, the story is the same overall. In every one of these 67 counties of Alabama, every single county in the state voted less Republican and more Democratic last night. Every single one. And when you have a uniform trend like that, it's enough to overcome a 28-point margin by which the Republican candidate won that statewide election last fall. And part of that may be that Alabama doesn't like Donald Trump anymore. They obviously liked him a ton last year, but he was a clear endorser and supporter of the Republican who lost the primary to Roy Moore, and then he was a clear endorser and supporter of Roy Moore last night. The president's White House senior strategist, Steve Bannon, was down in Alabama multiple times, including on Election Day, rallying with Roy Moore. Moore's campaign was very much associated with Trump and Trumpism. Turns out Trump and Trumpism are less popular in Alabama than they used to be. Recent Fox News poll in Alabama had Donald Trump less favorable than Barack Obama in Alabama. Exit poll data last night showed that the same percentage of people viewed Trump unfavorably as they did favorably, from a guy who won that state by 28 points. So from a national perspective, that's one way to understand why the U.S. Senate is about to get one more Democrat from this most unlikely of states. But here's one other way to look at it. This is the same voter data from last night's election viewed through a slightly different lens. This was put together by Miles Coleman, who is an election analyst at Decision Desk HQ. This shows how Alabama voters voted last night in each congressional district in the state. There's 7 congressional districts, and this is what the vote last night looks like if you assign them to each of their congressional districts. And you will notice here that only one of those districts is blue, is Democratic. What that means is that even with the gigantic every county in the state shift in the Democratic Party's direction last night, even with the Democratic candidate getting a statewide win last night outside the recount margin, even with the Democratic candidate winning by huge margins in every large population center in the state, he won Montgomery, he won Birmingham, he won Mobile, he won Huntsville. Even with that huge shift toward the Democratic Party and their candidate last night, had the same people who turned out last night been casting those same votes, except they counted for Congress instead of for Senate, that vote last night would have still sent only one Democrat to Congress and 6 Republicans, which is what Alabama sends to Congress right now. How is that possible? How do you get a vote that Democratic and it turns in all those Republicans and only one Democrat? What? It's because of something that the Republican Party did in 2010. Which was a plan called Red Map. It was a national program, but in places like Alabama, it was very local, very practical, and it ended up being a big deal for a long time. The top Republican in the Alabama legislature later wrote a book about it, explaining how it worked in that state, which is part of why we've got an inside peek at what happened here. He's now in prison, which is an awkward footnote, but that's how it goes. It's Alabama. It's pretty simple, though, the plan. The National Republican Party quietly solicited funding from rich Republican donors all over the country, and then they secretly funneled those donations into individual low-profile state House and state Senate races in Alabama. And they picked the races they were supporting with this national money with the specific goal of winning control of the state legislature for the Republican Party, right? We think of Alabama as a red state, as a state that's almost unilaterally Republican-controlled and has been for a long time. But that's not true. Before 2010, Democrats had held at least either the House or the Senate, or both, since after the Civil War, since Reconstruction. Republicans used this national red map strategy to secretly fund a bunch of their legislative candidates in 2010, and that is the only way they were able to win control of the state legislature for the first time in a dog's age. It was 2010. That was a census year, which meant once they got control of the legislature, they would then be in charge of redistricting. And that's when they drew these districts. They drew these districts for themselves in the legislature, and then they drew districts for congressional seats. And the way they drew all of those districts is to guarantee that even on a huge Democratic night like Democrats had last night in Alabama, Republicans still get to hold on to power in the legislature and in Congress. We talked to one of the Democratic leaders of the Alabama legislature last night, Representative Marika Coleman, who told us that last night didn't just look to her like a win for Doug Jones. It looked to her like a real opportunity for Democrats in Alabama in the 2018 elections next year, a new start, a show of strength for a renewed, smart, vigorous Democratic Party in her state. She made a very compelling case for it. But now here's the test, because this is the tilted playing field that Democrats are playing on. They can have a night as good as the left side of your screen, and it would still result in a balance of power like the one you see on the right side of your screen. That is a tilted playing field. But that is not made in nature. That was not handed down from God or the Constitution. That is a reality that Republicans created through their own political planning and execution. They weren't even in charge of the whole state as recently as 8 years ago. But now that this Democratic Party in this deep South state got up last night and threw its head back and roared, the question is what the Republicans have done in Alabama undoable? What would it take for Democrats to be strong enough to tilt this playing field back to level, to actually win any lasting power in that state? And what can Democrats in the rest of the country learn from this miracle that they did pull off last night? Joining us again tonight is Alabama Democratic State Rep Marika Coleman. Representative Coleman, it's great to have you back. I knew as soon as I said goodnight to you last night that I was hoping you'd be able to come back tonight.
Great to be back. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, let me just ask you first about your reaction. When we spoke last night, you were confident, but we did not have final results in. How do you feel? I know you supported Doug Jones very, very fervently. How do you feel, and what's the reaction that you've seen in your state today?
Well, I'm in awe of the state of Alabama today. I am just so excited that Alabamians across the state of Alabama, both Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike, black, white, young, old, rich, poor, went out to show the rest of the country that we are the type of Alabama that is an inclusive Alabama, and we had this coalition of folks that went across the state that worked together and got Judge Jones elected. And I'm just excited to show the country that we are not what some people refer to as Bama or backwoods when they use that derogatory term, that we are a great state that is diverse, and we're excited about the leadership of Doug Jones in the U.S. Senate.
Well, tell me about that coalition and that diversity that you're talking about, the kind of effort that you saw last night. I mean, obviously, there was a lot of national interest. There was a lot of national money that came into this race. It's a race with big national implications. Do you feel like the Democratic Party in Alabama has been strengthened by this process and has learned anything going forward in terms of trying to reclaim more power at the state level and more congressional seats and all the other things that show off the sort of, that would show off in the future the kind of strength we saw last night?
Yeah, 100%. Again, this was a coalition, and the Democratic Party nationally now sees that in the state of Alabama, we do have this coalition of communities of color, of the LGBTQ community, of, again, different people from different social and economic backgrounds that actually do come together around issues, and that's what you saw. I was listening to your intro about Alabama and what are the opportunities in the 2018 elections. Of course, I'm the eternal optimist, and I'm still very excited about the opportunity. Although the Republicans tried to do everything they could to stack and pack, that's what we refer to as stacking and packing, when they take all of the African Americans or people in communities of color and stack those in particular districts. My district went from being 59% African American to 69% African American under the Republicans' initial plan. The Alabama Legislative Black Caucus sued, and we won. So 12 of those districts were deemed by that 3-judge panel that they were actually drawn for racial intent. Because those 12 were identified that way, all 35 of the districts that were leaning or minority districts that lean African American, lean Democrat had to be redrawn. So now we have more influence districts. So those influence districts are those districts that at least 25% of African Americans and other communities of color are within those districts, and they have the opportunity to influence the outcome. Now, it might not be a Democrat that wins that election, but it might be more of a centrist Republican and not someone that is so far to the right, Tea Party Freedom Caucus, that we literally can't have a conversation with them at all. So again, I'm still very optimistic about 2018. I think that we're going to end up with a Democratic governor. When we had a governor in the state of Alabama who said that she believed these women, but she was going to choose to vote for Roy Moore, there is a target on Kay Ivey's back, and we're going to run with it, and we're going to make sure that a Democrat is elected as governor of the great state of Alabama.
Alabama Democratic State Representative Marika Coleman, thank you very much for helping us understand your perspective on this and how this is resonating in the state. A lot of focus tonight on how this is resonating around the country, but the way you're talking about how it's resonating inside your own state, I think is just as important and fascinating. Thank you. Good luck to you.
Yeah, we're excited today, but we're working already today.
I can tell. Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. All right, more to come here tonight. Stay with us.
Mr. Rosenstein, your testimony today is that you believe Bob Mueller is a person of high integrity. Is that right?
Yes.
You believe that his investigation is being conducted fairly. Is that correct?
Yes.
You also believe that, and you understand that he's publicly indicted 2 individuals with respect to his investigation.
Correct.
He's also obtained 2 guilty pleas with respect to his investigation.
Correct.
Is there good cause to fire Bob Mueller as we sit here today?
Not to my knowledge.
Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein today tersely saying that he sees no good cause to fire the special counsel Robert Mueller. Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein was in Congress today testifying in the House at a hearing where most of the Republican members of the committee wanted to use that occasion to express their outrage about the terribleness of the Robert Mueller investigation and what feels like an orchestrated effort to set up the country for the fact that Robert Mueller is going to be undermined or perhaps fired by the White House. That's what it feels like, at least from a distance. But joining us now is Congressman Eric Swalwell, Democrat of California, member of the Judiciary Committee that heard that testimony today. Congressman, thank you very much for being here tonight. Much appreciated.
Of course. Thank you, Rachel, for having me back.
So the Justice Department has released to reporters text messages from two people who no longer work on the Mueller investigation, in which they discuss political reactions to things going on during the campaign. Republicans have been focused on their texts that were critical of Trump, but we've seen from the released messages that they were also critical of Clinton, of Congress, of Bernie Sanders. Do you understand what your Republican colleagues are so upset about with this alleged bias, and what do you make of their complaints?
Rachel, it seems that they're upset that Bob Mueller is making progress in his investigation, and I hear on the Judiciary Committee an ominous drumbeat to continue to discredit Bob Mueller and his team, and I believe that drumbeat is a signal to the president, because many Republicans and Democrats have expressed that firing Bob Mueller without cause would be clearly obstruction of justice. However, obstruction of justice would be referred to the House Judiciary Committee. And if the Judiciary Committee members are signaling that they themselves have problems with Bob Mueller, just like President Trump has expressed that the investigation is a hoax, well, then you can clearly see that there's little deterrent for President Trump from firing Bob Mueller. That's the real concern right now, is that he may have a permissive environment from our committee.
In terms of the, I guess the other side of the environment that the president may be considering here is what the reaction would be within the Justice Department if he ordered Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein to fire Bob Mueller. Clearly, in his response most directly to you, but also in the rest of his responses today, even to Republican members, it seemed like Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein had no interest in entertaining the idea that Mueller is not only fireable, he didn't seem to want to entertain at all the idea that there's any bias or any sort of impermissible behavior or personnel involved in the Mueller investigation.
That's right. And I told Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, we're all counting on him. This investigation is a very narrow bridge, and the most important thing he can do is to not be afraid and fearlessly walk that bridge and show independence, because he may be asked to fire Bob Mueller, and the best thing he can do is to refuse to do so until the president's able to find someone who can, and then I think that would warrant obstruction of justice proceedings.
Congressman, let me ask you about one substantive piece of this investigation that I just don't get. I'm asking you about this as a Judiciary Committee member, also as an Intelligence Committee member. National Security Advisor Mike Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI about talking with the Russian ambassador about sanctions. We now know from good reporting that's not contested from the White House that a lot of other Trump transition officials knew that he had had those conversations with the Russians about sanctions. Several of them who were told about those conversations then publicly lied about it. There's been reporting that the special counsel is particularly interested in Flynn's firing, whether there were attempts to obstruct the investigation into him. Given all of that, do you have any sense, anything you can speak about publicly, as to why so many people in the Trump administration publicly lied about Mike Flynn and the fact that he was talking to the Russians about sanctions? Do you have any sense of what was motivating that?
Yeah, Rachel, the pattern here, whether it's around Michael Flynn or anyone else who had contacts with Russia, was to protect candidate or President Trump, and then to protect themselves. And only when the FBI or our investigation or reporting has confronted them with conflicting evidence have they sometimes come around. But also, the other question I have is, why did they allow Michael Flynn to stay on for so long once they knew that he had lied? Now, Bob Mueller, to contrast with President Trump, when he found out he had an agent who had the perception of favoritism for one of the persons being investigated, he was fired immediately. He was let go. And President Trump only fired Michael Flynn once it became a public relations problem for him, if you want to compare the two as far as their character.
Congressman Eric Swalwell of California, Judiciary Committee member, Intelligence Committee member. Really appreciate your time tonight, sir. Nice to see you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Rachel.
All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Doug Jones election on the 12th, Rosenstein testimony on the 13th. Tomorrow on the 14th, remember what's happening? Federal Communications Commission is expected to repeal net neutrality, an important rule put in place by the Obama administration to ban internet service providers from basically controlling what you see on the internet and what internet-based services you can use. That would be the practical effect if service providers are allowed to pick and choose which traffic goes fast and which traffic goes slow online for their own commercial purposes. That vote's expected tomorrow. But now, in the final hours before that vote, a group of state attorneys general has asked the FCC to not take that vote, to delay it. Because according to an analysis from the New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, there have been as many as 2 million public comments submitted to the FCC about this decision under stolen identities. This all happened during the FCC's public comment period. Real people whose names were used to post these comments have been objecting, but it really happened on a very large scale. Here's the kind of example. This fake comment is purportedly from my father. The problem is the comment was posted more than a year after his death. Right? People are complaining to the FCC about what appears to have been a corruption of the public comment period here. The 19 state attorneys general who are pushing for a delay say the comment faking is an attack on the integrity of the democratic process. They say any decision the FCC makes on the basis, even the partial basis, of these fake comments would be an illegitimate decision. Again, as of now, the FCC is still scheduled to take this vote tomorrow. If they do, expect it to be the subject of a lot of lawsuits immediately. But with this request from 19 different states for a delay, I'm not sure we've seen the end of even this part of this fight. Watch this space. That does it for us tonight. We will see you again tomorrow. Now it's time for the last word with the great Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. And I think we all recognize that the story about a 14-year-old girl had a big impact on that race in Alabama last night. And possibly by the media anyway, but certainly not by the voters who delivered it for Doug Jones. There were some other 14-year-old girls, those 3 14-year-old girls and 1 11-year-old girl who were killed in the bombing in 1963. And Denise McNair was the 11-year-old. Her sister, Lisa McNair, is going to join us tonight. She got the chance this week to vote for the guy who got murder convictions against 2 of the men who killed her sister.
Wow. And all those years later, 2001 and 2002, to get those convictions, to get that justice for those little girls. And that was Doug Jones. Wow.
And those little girls would be in their 60s now, Rachel, and they are the kind of women who delivered that state last night for the Democrats.
God bless you, man. Well done.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks.
Well, President Trump put it all on the line in Alabama. And I mean, he put it all on the line, and he lost. He sided with the craziest, most unprofessional and hateful advisor in American politics, Steve Bannon, and the president locked himself in an embrace with an accused child molester in Alabama, where the president of the United States was crushed, just crushed last night by the newest face of the resistance to out-of-control Trumpism.
We have come so far, and the people of Alabama have spoken. They have said
Republicans now know Donald Trump can find a way to lose elections for Republicans anywhere, anytime. Republicans now know that Donald Trump's support of Steve Bannon and Donald Trump's acceptance of advice from Steve Bannon is the very fast-acting cancer that can kill the Republican Party. You couldn't get the microphone out of Steve Bannon's hand when he was campaigning for Roy Moore and prancing around Alabama stages as if everyone was there just to see him and to listen to him. Steve Bannon knows nothing about Alabama politics, and he proved that every time he opened his mouth about Alabama politics. And last night, in the humiliating crush of defeat, here is what Steve Bannon had to say.
Mr. Bannon, this is a huge defeat for you.
Steve Bannon, who lied about Doug Jones every day of that campaign. Steve Bannon, who's always ready to attack Republicans like Mitch McConnell. Steve Bannon, who always tries to pretend to his small cult of followers that he's the toughest guy in the room. That Steve Bannon was slapped into a stunned silence last night by the voters of Alabama. This is the way Steve Bannon's adventure in Alabama will always now be remembered.
Mr. Bannon, this is a huge defeat for you.
A stunned silence by the man who Alabama voters ignored or hated just as much as Washington Republicans hate him. Steve Bannon was immediately attacked by Mitch McConnell last night in a statement put out by McConnell's super PAC blaming Bannon for what happened in Alabama. Donald Trump's marching orders to Alabama were ignored just as much as Steve Bannon's.
Get out and vote for Roy Moore. Do it. Do it. Do it.
Do it. Do it. They didn't do it. Here is the robocall that Donald Trump made to Republican voters in Alabama.
Hi, this is President Donald Trump, and I need Alabama to go vote for Roy Moore. It is so important. We're already making America great again. I'm going to make America safer and stronger and better than ever before. But we need that seat. We need Roy voting for us.
And it rambles on and on for another minute. And that robocall did Donald Trump and Roy Moore absolutely no good. That robocall just gave Donald Trump that much more ownership of the defeat in Alabama, where it is no longer clear that Donald Trump could win an election against the right Democrat in Alabama. Exit polls actually showed Donald Trump with only a 48% approval rating in Alabama and exactly the same disapproval rating. That's in a state that Donald Trump won by 28 points. It's because Donald Trump is collapsing. Trumpism is collapsing. A new Monmouth poll shows President Trump hitting a new low of 32% approval. After what was surely a short night's sleep, the president found a way to say, "I told you so," this morning, when he tweeted, "The reason I originally endorsed Luther Strange, and his numbers went up mightily, is that I said Roy Moore will not be able to win the general election. I was right!" Exclamation point. Roy worked hard, but the deck was stacked against him. Another exclamation point. Today in Washington, we saw a post-election reaction unlike any we've ever seen before. Republicans overjoyed by the defeat of a Republican candidate for Senate.
I thought it was a great night for America. So I couldn't be more happy. I know that I'm supposed to only cheer for people on my side of the aisle, but I thought the people of Alabama did a great thing for our country last night.
What Republicans try to do is make that a choice between whites and blacks in Alabama. And what is hopeful about this is that Doug Jones was able to bring a coalition together that was majority people of color, but also millennials, more college-educated whites than Democrats have in the past. And I think that's a really hopeful sign for the future.
And Jason, Doug Jones now has 3 years of incumbency to let Alabama see that if you just go back to as recently as 1993, when both of the Alabama senators were Democrats, the state won't blow up. No disaster is going to happen. You know, Richard Shelby's going to be there. Doug Jones is going to be there. And he sounds like the kind of Southern Democratic senator who could actually win re-election.
Well, yeah, the kind of Southern Democratic senator used to exist. Just like we used to have, Republicans up north. But I think one of the best things that Doug Jones said when he's been talking, since being elected is, I hope this turns this Alabama into a two-party state. Because that benefits all the voters if there's actual competition. And one other thing that I think is so key about this, Donald Trump's special form of magic, the special set of skills that he seems to be able to have, they only work for him. It's very clear that other people can't run this. Other people can't run and say offensive things and racist things and anti-Semitic things. It caught me. Steve Bannon insulted Mitt Romney for going on his Mormon mission trip. And he claimed that was him skipping out on Vietnam. There's 37,000 Mormons in Alabama. You think they heard that? So it's about time the Republicans learn they've got to run a different way, too, if they want to be successful.
And let's listen to what Doug Jones had to say today about the phone calls he received. Some of them are pretty surprising.
I have received calls from so many well-wishers of friends and family, but also future colleagues in Washington on both sides of the aisle. I have received calls from Democratic senators. I've received calls from my longtime friend, Senator Shelby, Leader McConnell, Leader Schumer, and calls from the President of the United States, President Trump. This election shows that people across this country, I want to see people work together.
Nira, I would expect Mitch McConnell to call. It makes sense. He believes that a Democrat in Alabama can maybe come his way on some votes. Of course, Richard Shelby's going to call. That's what senators do. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, called the Democrat who won a Senate seat. Did someone say to him, you've got to start lobbying him, you got to start lobbying Jones now? You might be able to get his vote on something?
I don't know. I mean, today, these morning tweets seem to have forgotten all the tweets he had before attacking Doug Jones. So maybe he made the call, forgetting all the things he called him on Friday night and Saturday morning and Sunday and Monday and Tuesday. I think that people want to talk about issues, et cetera. But what happened here is Doug Jones repudiated Trumpism.
Yes.
He said, you know what? Alabama can rise above splitting one group against another group. That was the core of his message from the day he won the primary through the summer till today. And I think Republicans should recognize that there is a majority forming in the country, many of whom used to be Republicans, who are now voting for Democrats because they're so disgusted by, I hate to use the term, but gutter politics.
Nira Tandon and Jason Johnson, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Coming up, African-American women made the difference in the election in Alabama last night. For one of those women, it was the chance to vote for the man who prosecuted the murderers of her sister, Denise McNair, who was killed in the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham in 1963. Denise McNair's little sister, Lisa McNair, will get tonight's last word.
Our message to Mitch McConnell is simple. No vote on the Republican tax bill before Doug Jones takes his rightful seat in the United States. You bet.
That was the demand from Democrats today after Doug Jones' historic win in Alabama. Protesters chanted "No Jones, no vote" inside the Hart Senate office building today after Republicans announced an agreement, what they're calling an agreement in principle, on merging the House and Senate tax cut bills into a final bill that they hope to pass next week. This new bill, which is something of a compromise between the two other bills, cuts the top personal income tax rate from 39.6% to 37%. It cuts the corporate income tax rate to 21% instead of the 20% that was in both the House and Senate bills. It limits the state and local tax deductibility to $10,000 total for property taxes or state income taxes. And it limits the mortgage interest deduction to loans of $750,000 or less. We're joined now by Gene Sperling, former director of the National Economic Council for Presidents Obama and Clinton, and back with us, John Heilman. Gene Sperling, what do you make of the vaguely described compromise bill?
Well, it says a lot, right? You had a bill that blew a hole in the deficit, that was tremendously tilted towards the most well-off, towards foreign investors, left the middle class out. And when they get together to try to fix it, what do? They do nothing significant on state and local. They do nothing to really help the middle class. But what they do is they decide they're going to move up the corporate tax cut a year early, and they're going to take the top rate. This will be the rate that will affect whether you're Warren Buffett or a billionaire. They're going to lower that tax cut, that tax rate from 39.6 to 37%. I mean, it's kind of shocking that that's the last thing they're going to do. They're not even hiding how much this tax cut is for the most well-off, for the donors. And the thing that I just don't understand, and maybe John can explain, is they're rushing this through at this record pace, making every compromise. Everybody's caving, showing no backbone. And it's supposed to be because it's good for their politics. And yet, there was a CBS poll that showed 69% thought it helped the wealthy versus 24% helping their own family. 55% thought it was more geared towards the top donors of the Republican Party versus 10% for average families. I just can't understand why they think passing this very unpopular bill that's going to make our tax code less fair, more complicated, is somehow going to be good politics, such good politics for them that they could pass this type of monstrosity.
John, could you help Gene and me understand how the Republicans voting for this see the politics of it?
Well, there's almost nothing in the world that I understand better than Gene Sperling understands everything. So I'm not sure I can help Gene on any front. He's been dealing with tax politics and policy for longer I think than I've been alive. But look, Lawrence, you and I have discussed this on the show on multiple occasions. The bill is really unpopular. Tax cut bills are not supposed to be unpopular. Tax cut bills are supposed to be just kind of inherently, they're popular. That's how you build them. You make them popular. This thing's been underwater from day one. So on some basic fundamental level, it makes no sense politically, other than the following level, which is they are so desperate, the Republicans are, to get something done. They think that something is better than nothing. And even when something is really unpopular, they somehow think that the alternative to that, which is passing nothing. Now, we could all have a discussion about how they could pass a better, more equitable tax bill, but that horse has been out of the barn door from day one. So now they're just looking at two possibilities: an unpopular tax bill or no bill whatsoever, an entire year in which nothing has happened on the legislative front of any consequence in Washington, D.C., and they are making the gamble that they can, in the course of a year between now and the midterms in 2018, that they can turn those numbers around. I think it's a horrible bet for them, and they're unlikely to be able to move those numbers, but that is the bet they're making.
Let's step back in time to a similar situation. That's the special election that followed the death of Senator Teddy Kennedy in Massachusetts. That special election produced a Republican winner, Scott Brown, who was then waiting to take his seat. And, of course, the Obama health care bill was at stake, hanging in the balance. Let's listen to what President Obama said at the time.
Here's one thing I know, and I just want to make sure that this is off the table. The Senate certainly shouldn't try to jam anything through until Scott Brown is seated. People in Massachusetts spoke. He's got to be part of that process.
Gene, that's not the message we're hearing from Republicans today.
Well, you know, and you know who else spoke eloquently about that was John McCain. You know, I think one of the, you know, really crushing disappointments that we've seen so much in 2017 is really that there are a lot of honorable Republicans who seem to have lost their spine, lost their principle, lost their backbone. You know, Lawrence, I remember when you were staff director of the Senate Finance Committee, you had giants, Bob Dole, Pat Moynihan, who you worked for, a sense you really took things seriously and tried to work together. And you're seeing all of these people cave, even on a process, even on something as simple as waiting to the people of Alabama's representative can be seated. And, you know, I think John's analysis is good on why they're doing this, but I really question it because their view's a little bit, well, no one's going to really know what's in this tax bill. We'll pass it and we'll have an accomplishment. Well, I'm here in California. Let me tell you, there's 11 Republicans who are voting for a bill that everyone is going to know by November 2018 punishes people from California, raises taxes significantly on middle and upper middle class people, and those 11 Republicans could have stopped it. And what do they do? What do they get? They get this tiny $10,000 exemption, which will mean not very much, but what they get is they're going to lower the top rate for millionaires. So this is puzzling both on process and puzzling on substance, how they are handling this final week.
We're going to close it with all of us puzzled to some extent on the Republican view of the politics of this. Gene Sperling, John Heilman, thank you both for joining us tonight. Republicans in Congress want to pretend now that FBI agents do not have the right to vote. We have some breaking news at this hour from Alabama. Roy Moore has issued another statement about his defeat last night. He has not conceded defeat. He simply says in this new statement, this has been a very close race, and we are awaiting certification by the Secretary of State. There is nothing in his statement that indicates he will ask for a recount or anything involving that will change the outcome in this. It goes on at some length and becomes Republicans' quintessential Roy Moore. Here is but a sample. Roy Moore said, "Today, we no longer recognize the universal truth that God is the author of our life and liberty. Abortion, sodomy, and materialism have taken the place of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." That is Roy Moore tonight in Alabama. Today in Washington, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said this to the House Intelligence Committee.
There are a lot of media stories speculating about what the special counsel may or may not be doing. I know what he's doing. I'm appropriately exercising my oversight responsibilities, and so I can assure you that the special counsel is conducting himself consistently with our understanding about the scope of his investigation.
Now, that's Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who was appointed to that position by President Donald Trump. Today, Rosenstein responded to new attacks from Republicans over the impartiality of the special prosecutor's investigation after text messages between two of the investigators last year were turned over to Congress last night, showing the two expressing support for one of the two major party candidates who ran for president. In this case, it was support for Hillary Clinton. The New York Times also obtained the messages and reported after Mr. Trump made an apparent sexual allusion related to the size of his hands. Ms. Page wrote, "This man cannot be president." In another exchange, Mr. Starzak wrote of a potential Trump presidency, "I'm scared for our organization." That turned out to be a well-placed fear. He also referred to Mr. Trump as a douche.
I've discussed this with Director Mueller, and he and I collectively have a lot of experience managing offices in the Department of Justice. We recognize we have employees with political opinions, and it's our responsibility to make sure those opinions do not influence their actions. Pardon me. And so I believe that Director Mueller understands that and that he is running that office appropriately.
Former House Intelligence Committee staff member Mika Oyang and New York Times reporter Charlie Savage will join us next.
In testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, you said that you would only fire Special Counsel Mueller for good cause and that you had not seen any yet. Several months have passed since then. Have you seen good cause to fire Special Counsel Mueller?
No.
Thank you. If you were ordered today to fire Mr. Mueller, what would you do?
So I've explained previously, I would follow the regulation. If there were good cause, I would act. If there were no good cause, I would not.
And you've seen no good cause so far?
Correct.
Joining the discussion now, Mika Oyang, former House Intelligence Committee staffer, and also with us, Charlie Savage, New York Times. Mika, there's a certain assumption in this hearing that FBI agents, people who work in the Justice Department, surrender their right to vote. They surrender their right to an opinion about candidates when they take those jobs.
Right, and that's where the Republican questioning is coming from, the suggestion that they're not allowed to have opinions. They are allowed to have their own opinions. They're not supposed to be engaging in politics in certain ways under the Hatch Act, and they're not supposed to act with any kind of bias in their official duties. And the question is are they doing anything that might suggest they're biased on behalf of or against a particular investigation? And
Charlie, when Donald Trump, in a Republican debate, clearly referred to the size of his, to what he was considering a description of his own genitalia. One of these people said, "This man cannot be president," which was the reaction of a majority of the United States.
Well, that was certainly one of the tweets that jumped, or the text messages that jumped out. There were a number that suggested significant hostility to a Trump presidency and support for Hillary Clinton's candidacy. But the nuance that Mika was just bringing up, I think, is one that we saw repeatedly brought up by Rod Rosenstein today, which is there's a difference between political affiliation, political beliefs, and political bias. The fact that certain officials in the Justice Department have political affiliations and political views cannot be taken into account when choosing whom to hire for something like the special counsel investigation. That would be a violation of the rules of the department. And as long as they don't let their political views influence investigative decisions, that's okay. And so what the Deputy Attorney General was saying was, just because these people had these views, does not mean that the investigation is tainted. In any case, they've been removed from it. So the takeaway from this is that this swelling chorus that we've seen in the recent days, growing out of rank-and-file Republicans, out of Fox News and conservative media, that sort of led to today, which was this whole edifice is crumbling down, Mueller has got to go. Rushed into Rosenstein today, and he was unswayed by it. He's saying he's seen nothing to date that would lead him to the decision to remove Mueller if he were asked to do so by President Trump. And so that means the takeaway is, at this point, if Trump were to decide to fire Mueller based on anything that's happened to date, everything that we now know about what was happening inside that investigation, the complaints that Mueller is ranging afar from just a close focus on the Russia election issue, he would not do it. And that means that Trump would have to fire him or force his resignation and get in search of someone who would obey his orders, putting us back into a Saturday Night Massacre scenario. I think that's the important takeaway of today's hearing.
Mika, listen to some of the Republican members of the Judiciary Committee today. You certainly, they are all but saying they believe the only way to be a fair investigator of Donald Trump is you have to have voted for Donald Trump and still very strongly support Donald Trump today. You have to be one of the 32% of Americans.
That's right. What you see here from the Republicans is a concerted effort to try and smear the objectivity of anyone who is bringing us the facts in these investigations. You see that in the attempts by Don Jr. to try and shut down the House Democrats who are speaking out about the hearing. You see this in the Republicans who are trying to accuse the Mueller team of bias. You see this in the way that they go after the press. Anyone who's trying to bring the American people the facts, they say they're biased against the president because they weren't his firm supporters.
And it used to be that one of the definitions of a fair special prosecutor is that the special prosecutor was from the opposite party of the administration being investigated. Ted Lieu said today, summarized some of the things he was saying today in a tweet where he said Rosenstein agreed that no one is above the law. FBI Director raised $39,000 in donations to Republicans does not mean that he can't be impartial on a criminal investigation. And Charlie, there's an FBI director who's contributed $39,000 to Republican candidates, and Democrats are not jumping up and down saying he's unfair.
That's right. More broadly, I think that a lot of the apparatus here that we've seen brought to bear on this, starting with Director Mueller himself and Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General who appointed him, are Republicans. And so the notion that they are inherently going to be biased against a Republican presidency is one that is part of why we're in such uncharted waters here in the sort of torquing of American politics that has been this year that we've been living through.
Charlie Savage and Mika Ouyang, thank you both for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Coming up, how Doug Jones got the second most important victory of his life last night. That's next. Doug Jones was born in Fairfield, Alabama, a suburb of Birmingham, in 1954. 2 weeks after Doug Jones was born, the United States Supreme Court issued its unanimous decision in Brown versus the Board of Education that segregated schools are unconstitutional. When Doug Jones was 9 years old, members of the Ku Klux Klan placed 19 sticks of dynamite under the steps of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. 3 14-year-old girls and 1 11-year-old girl, proudly wearing their best Sunday dresses, were walking down the stairs of the church when the bomb went off. They were killed instantly. Addie Mae Collins, age 14. Cynthia Wesley, age 14. Carol Robertson, age 14. And Denise McNair, age 11. We've all heard the story in the last few weeks of what happened to a 14-year-old girl when she got in Roy Moore's car and went for that long ride to his house in the woods. That story turned a lot of Republican voters against Roy Moore. But the story of what happened to those 3 14-year-old girls and an 11-year-old girl at the 16th Street Baptist Church drove the Democratic voters to the polls who won this election for Doug Jones. Black women. Most white women voted for Roy Moore, but 98% of black women voted for Doug Jones. Doug Jones believes that the tragic deaths of Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Denise McNair woke up this country. They woke up a country that did not know that going to church in the South could get you killed if you were black. And so those 4 little girls have taken their place in the Civil Rights Museum that is now right across the street from the spot where the bomb went off at the 16th Street Baptist Church. And when I was in Birmingham a few years ago, I stood at the spot where the bomb was planted before touring the museum across the street, where I learned more about what Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks and Medgar Evers and many others had done and had sacrificed in this country's agonizing awakening to the need of a civil rights movement, a need so urgent that the leaders of that movement had to be willing to die to take their places at the front of those marches. But Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Denise McNair did not go to church that day ready to die. They went to church to pray, to sing, to wear their best dresses and their best shoes. The shoes that Denise McNair was wearing that day are now on display across the street at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Denise McNair should be in their 60s today, and they should have been standing in line to vote on Tuesday in Alabama. Instead, people who knew them, people who loved them, stood in line to vote for Doug Jones, the man who convicted the last 2 of the bombers who were charged with the murders of Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Denise McNair. Denise McNair's younger sister cast her vote on Tuesday. And on Tuesday night, she got to watch the man who won convictions of the men who murdered her sister achieve the second most important victory of his life. Denise McNair's sister, Lisa McNair, will join us next.
I damn sure believe that I have done my part to ensure that men who hurt little girls should go to jail and not the United States Senate.
Joining us now, Lisa McNair, whose sister Denise McNair was 11 years old when she was killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham. Lisa McNair, thank you very much for joining us tonight. It really is an honor to have you with us. I really appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Lisa, what was it like for you last night watching Doug Jones win the second most important victory of his life?
Oh, my God, it was so amazing. It was just exhilarating and exciting, and oh, wow. I don't even think I really have words.
You were campaigning for him in Alabama. What did you tell voters that you thought they needed to know about Doug Jones?
That he is honest and tenacious and fair, and he will work very hard for all people of the state of Alabama.
And Lisa, you didn't know your older sister. You were actually born after she was killed. But she certainly, I'm sure, has been with you in life. She's become a civil rights icon and is remembered by all of us. What is it about your sister that you were hearing from voters that was part of what moved voters in this election?
People here in Alabama, particularly in Birmingham, are extremely moved by what happened to the 4 girls. It's kind of part of the fabric of our city here. When I meet people who I don't know and, you know, they identify who I am, I often get people who cry instantly about that. And so it cuts people very deeply because we're in the Bible Belt, can relate to taking their little girl to church on Sunday and to the thought of, your child being killed and murdered in church is just inconceivable to everybody.
What is it like for you, Lisa, personally, when you keep encountering these kinds of emotional reactions? There must be an emotional weight for it on you, too.
I really just try to be there and support them because they're actually having the moment, and I want them to feel comfortable being able to express themselves in whatever way they need to around me. So that's what I try to do when I encounter people like that.
Did you ever expect to see a candidate like Roy Moore emerge in modern Alabama, echoing all the worst kinds of sounds that were made back at the time when your sister was killed?
Well, I had hoped that most of that was gone, but, you know, I've lived here all my life, so I know that it isn't. But I'm grateful that the voters of the state of Alabama decided to choose respect and love over hate and separation. So,
I want to quote something that one of the black women who voted for Doug Jones told the New York Times. This is Ella Neighbors. She's 55 years old. And she said, we knew the world was looking at us. She said, those 4 little girls are on their feet tonight at the 16th Street Baptist Church celebrating. They're celebrating in spirit. Is that the way it felt for you?
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, I think the 4 little girls and all the other people who died that are nameless or whose names are not in the history books that are out there and people don't know about them, and they were just cheering for the good of Alabama, because there is good here in Alabama. People are really good, and this is my home, and sometimes you just don't see it. So last night it was great to be able to see that and to see that that trickled over into the voting booth.
Lisa McNair gets tonight's last word. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Lisa McNair. A real honor to have you with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The 11th Hour with Brian Williams is next.
Tonight, after that Roy Moore defeat and the big Democratic victory, how do Trump and Bannon and the GOP now pick up the pieces? Already tonight, there's more than enough blame to go around. Plus, Donald Trump Jr. back on the Hill today, while on the right, there was more today of this war against Mueller. And the man he reports to came to his defense as the Russia investigation continues to roll on. And we came to know her on her way up on the reality show of the future president. Well, tonight, Omarosa is out. Question is, was she carried out or just pushed? The 11th hour begins now. Well, good evening once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York. Day 328 of the Trump administration, a day when the president and Republican Party leaders are grappling with a new political reality, that a Democrat could run for and win a Senate seat in deep red Alabama. Doug Jones' victory over Republican Roy Moore came by way of a sweeping and multiracial voting coalition. Nothing short of it. Jones spoke about that and about reaching across the political divide earlier today.
I have received calls from so many well-wishers of friends and family, but also future colleagues in Washington on both sides of the aisle. I have received calls from Democratic senators. I've received calls from my longtime friend, Senator Shelby, Leader McConnell, Leader Schumer, and calls from the President of the United States, President Trump. This election shows that people across this country, want to see people work together.
Alabama's senior senator, Richard Shelby, the Republican who refused to vote for Roy Moore, today reacted to Doug Jones' victory.
Well, the people of Alabama spoke. I told him that I look forward to working with him up here for the great interests of the nation and the people of Alabama.
Do you take any credit for the idea that Doug Jones was elected and Roy Moore lost?
No. I'm a Republican. I wrote in a Republican. I didn't vote for a Democrat. Wouldn't.
This election, let's not forget, was something of a reckoning for Donald Trump, who heartily endorsed and campaigned for Roy Moore.
Get out and vote
for Roy Moore. Hi, this is President Donald Trump, and I need Alabama to go vote for Roy Moore.
But today, the president actually found a way to say, I told you so. He put this on Twitter. Quote, the reason I originally endorsed Luther Strange and his numbers went up mightily is that I said Roy Moore will not be able to win the general election. I was right. Roy worked hard, but the deck was stacked against him. And this is how the president reacted to the loss before cameras earlier today.
I would have, as the leader of the party, I would have liked to have had the seat.
How could that loss affect your agenda going forward?
I don't think it's going to affect it. I think we're doing a lot.
Ashley Parker of The Washington Post, who joins us in just a moment, reports on the mood in the White House today. She writes, quote, by Wednesday morning, as Trump watched the unflattering portrait of the loss unfold on television, the president grew piqued at the notion that he somehow was responsible. Quote, I won Alabama, and I would have won Alabama again, Trump said, according to a senior administration official. The president himself spread the blame. He faulted his former chief strategist, Stephen K. Bannon, for selling him what one outside advisor described as a bill of goods in urging him to support Moore, and he faulted Moore himself for being an abysmal candidate. He had campaigned with Moore in Alabama as part of his own effort to take down the Republican establishment Bannon had. Today, Bannon was also under fire from some in that same establishment for backing a candidate who lost a Senate seat that had been in Republican hands, let's not forget, for 2 decades.
I don't think Steve Bannon adds anything positive at all to the dialogue in the country. To see him on the stage this week with the big American flag behind him, he looked like some disheveled drunk that wandered in off the street. To have him become the face of politics, or to have a major voice in politics, I think is wrong. I think we should shut him.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has been under regular attack from Steve Bannon. Don't forget, Bannon has threatened him by saying, we're coming for you. Here is what McConnell aide Josh Holmes told Politico about Bannon and this Alabama election. Quote, he's proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he has no capacity to run a U.S. Senate race. If he's capable of losing the reddest state in the nation, he's capable of losing anywhere. Other Republican senators expressed their feelings today about Moore's loss, and there was almost from some a sense of relief.
Strange to say, I guess, from my side of the aisle, but I thought it was a great night for America. So I couldn't be more happy. The people of Alabama responded, I thought, in a very appropriate way.
Republicans, even some conservative Republicans, breathing a sigh of relief tonight over Doug Jones, the Democrat, winning over Roy Moore. But despite the defeat for Steve Bannon's candidate last night, Bannon's still planning on attacking on several fronts, supporting several insurgent candidates across the country. Our friend Charlie Sykes wrote today on the future of the Grand Old Party in a New York Times opinion piece headlined, A GOP Tragedy in 4 Acts, and we recommend it. We quote from it now, for many Republicans, this is a reprise of the choice they made a year ago when they decided to overlook Donald Trump's own conduct and character. But this time, the result is a stunning electoral defeat for Mr. Trump in one of the reddest states in the country. Here to talk about it tonight, Eugene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for The Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst, and the aforementioned Mr. Sykes, longtime conservative radio host and MSNBC contributor, and importantly, the author of the timely book, How the Right Lost Its Mind. Okay, Charlie, it's been 24 hours. Has the right still lost its mind?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that everything, you think about what it took to get to this particular moment, losing an unlosable Senate seat, nominating a benighted, bigoted crank who's also accused of being a pedophile, who then is supported by the Republican National Committee and the sitting president of the United States. The Republicans that I've talked to today are kind of oscillating between relief that they don't have to deal with Senator Roy Moore, but also panic and recognizing that this taint is not going away, and they are going into 2018 lashed to this president, Donald Trump, who was just out there on the hustings for Roy Moore, and people are not going to forget Roy Moore.
I neglected to point out at the top of the hour tonight, Roy Moore has appeared on television tonight, notably not conceding yet, though we are proceeding under the assumption that he has indeed lost. So, Gene, is Bannon as strong as he thinks, and is Trump as strong as he thinks in the light of day?
I think not, actually. I think, let's just step back for a second and look at the situation. Charlie Sykes and I like Charlie a lot. We would probably disagree on many, many, many issues, yet I wish I could have written that wonderful piece that he wrote. It's a great piece, Charlie. We find ourselves on the same side right now of this sort of existential question, I think, for American democracy and certainly for the Republican Party. And I think, I hope that last night is, we look back on that as maybe not the beginning of the end, but certainly the end of the beginning for Trumpism, Bannonism. I think it has not taken over the country. It is not all powerful. It can be stopped, and it was stopped in Alabama.
Charlie, does Bannon's role have to be look at this new candidate I've found, and we're going to come at you, establishment. I'm going to run this man or woman. Can't Bannon be a force for good and finding quality Republicans on ballots across the country?
Yeah, that seems rather unlikely, doesn't it? I mean, it turns out that the rumors of Steve Bannon's political genius were grossly exaggerated. It turns out to be something of an urban myth. So you wonder, even Donald Trump is rethinking whether or not he's going to, go to Steve Bannon and ask for his advice. But look, Steve Bannon is a force of destruction. He is a nihilist. He is an arsonist. And I think that the price that Republicans will pay electorally is very clear. But also, I think it's been clear for some time, just morally and ethically and just as a matter of principle, where he is taking this party. I mean, you and I could talk about it, Eugene and I could talk about, the dark streaks in American politics that are now being revealed. But you saw it all right there in Alabama. This is Steve Bannon in all of his glory saying, this is my vision of the future of the Republican Party. Someone who is nostalgic for slavery. Somebody who engages in some of the most bizarre, benighted prejudices, leaving aside the fact that he molests women. So if this is Steve Bannon's vision for the party, this has to be a clarifying moment for a political party that is facing, and I agree with Congressman Jolly about this, is facing the real prospect of a tsunami in 2018.
And David Jolly was good on this tonight, as he always is. And let's not forget, Charlie, Steve Bannon mocked Senator Corker from that stage. He mocked Condi Rice. He mocked the president's daughter in a kind of cloaked phrase, a special place in hell, using her wording about child molesters. Gene, as an NFL fan, every season there are a couple highlights of someone spiking the ball before they go over the goal line. This is where I ask you about Democratic over-exuberance, over-excitement way too early.
Well, that would be a bad idea for the Democratic Party to spike the ball before crossing the goal line and have it go through and be a touchback, right?
That has happened.
That has happened, right? But Democrats have much reason to be happy with how the party is performing these days. You look at the results from the November election, especially in Virginia, which is a purple state. I live in it. It's been getting bluer, but it's certainly not bright blue yet. The November election was a tsunami.
And
in
last
Virginia.
night was a real coalition in Alabama.
Exactly. It was a real coalition, and you saw the Democratic Party active in a statewide Alabama race in a way that it just hasn't been in 25 years. I mean, they don't bother to run in some statewide races in Alabama yet. They were mobilized. Anecdotal reports, just talking to people who lived in Alabama during the day yesterday, just showed a real excitement. There's a lot to capitalize on right now. There are a lot of people, a lot of Democrats and independents and Republicans who are anxious to come out and vote no to what they see happening in the Trump presidency.
Charlie and Gene, two smart guys, two great writers, have agreed to stick around. We're going to fit in a break. When we come back, the mad rush to pass a bill that will affect every man, woman, and child in this country. What could go wrong when the 11th hour continues?
We're very, very close to a historic legislative victory, the likes of which rarely has this country seen. It will be bigger than anything ever done in this country, bigger than the Reagan cuts, bigger than any cuts, and it'll also be reform. And there are also some other things in that bill that are very, very big that are somewhat unrelated, but ultimately I think it's all related.
Who says this president enjoys hyperbole bigger than anything ever done in this country? Republicans are charging forward with their tax bill, hoping to have a final version on the president's desk before the holiday break, giving the GOP their first major legislative victory, or so they hope, of this year, despite several polls showing this bill's unpopularity. A Washington Post opinion piece titled, quote, "On their tax bill, Republicans are making a risky, desperate gamble," points out, quote, "Writing a gigantic, sweeping reform of the tax system in just a few days might enable you to pass it before opposition can coalesce and mobilize, but it also might cause just enough relatively sane senators to want to hit the pause button." Eugene and Charlie are back with us. So, Charlie, is this going to be another mess with them trying to get out of town, tossing stuff in an enormous bill, some Republicans indeed slamming on the brakes, and potential legislative disaster?
Yeah, this should be the easiest thing that Republicans do, but they've turned this into an absolute hot mess in terms of its substance, with lots of hidden bombs, but also just the unseemly haste jamming something through. We're not going to see until, I believe, Friday what's actually in this legislation, and they're looking to vote on it on Wednesday. I mean, this is going to come back and bite them in the behind big time, because, you know, legislate in haste and repent at leisure, I think.
Eugene, I know you happen to believe that legislating in haste and because they need to is always a terrible reason, but there's desire to do something on this front.
Yeah, they want to do something on this front because they want to do something. They want to have something that they can tell voters we did, to give them a reason to send them back to Washington in November. You know, they're the obvious problem. There will be unintended consequences from this bill if it passes. It is a mess. You know, for all I know, they will repeal all sorts of taxes and fees they don't mean to repeal, and they'll put new ones on that they don't want to put on, and it'll be a mess that they'll have to straighten out. But even if it all works the way they think it's going to work, the version tonight, it's bad legislation. It's bad if you're a fiscal conservative. It's bad if you know you want to stimulate the economy. It's bad all the way around. It seems it's very hard to find reputable economists, either conservative ones or progressive ones, who think this makes sense. So I can't think this is a good idea, but I understand why they want to do it. They just don't want to go home empty-handed, and I think they're worried less about bad legislation and trying to talk to voters about that than they are about President Trump and trying to talk to voters about him.
And dear viewer, we sincerely apologize for not being able to offer more optimism than that, but that's the state of things as of tonight. And you'll please join me in thanking Eugene Robinson and Charlie Sykes. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Interesting conversation tonight. Coming up, today's high-profile departure from the Trump White House West Wing when we continue.
I don't like excuses. In this case, Omarosa has to go. You're fired.
Former apprentice contestant Omarosa Manigault Newman has been fired for real by Donald Trump before, at least on the show. Now the White House says she's again leaving the employ of the man who made her a household name, announcing today that she has resigned to pursue other opportunities. A source close to the Trump White House tells NBC News that Manigault Newman was escorted off the White House grounds Tuesday night after trying to re-enter the residence to contest the terms of her departure. Same source says it was Trump Chief of Staff John Kelly who made the call to fire her. A senior administration official tells NBC News it's accurate to characterize Manigault Newman as having been, quote, forced out of her job. Earlier tonight, the Secret Service seemed to contradict the White House's characterization of her departure, writing on Twitter, quote, the Secret Service was not involved in the termination process of Ms. Manigault Newman or the escort off the complex. Our only involvement in this matter was to deactivate the individual's pass, which grants access to the complex. An early supporter of Donald Trump, Manigault Newman served as director of African American outreach for the Trump campaign. And in a moment of bravado, she gave us this memorable moment during an interview with the PBS series Frontline.
Every critic, every detractor will have to bow down to President Trump. It's everyone who's ever doubted Donald, whoever disagreed, whoever challenged him. It is the ultimate revenge to become the most powerful man in the universe.
Her official title at the White House was Director of Communications for the Office of Public Liaison. She took heat earlier this year for putting the title honorable before her name. In what amounts to the obituary of her West Wing career, the New York Times writes, quote, Ms. Newman was not well liked by some White House advisors, including Reince Priebus, the former chief of staff, Jared Kushner, president's son-in-law and senior advisor, and John F. Kelly, the current chief of staff, according to multiple White House officials. A November Daily Beast profile of her was titled, No One Knows What Omarosa is Doing in the White House, Even Omarosa. Tonight, President Trump expressed his gratitude to Manigault Newman on Twitter, writing, quote, thank you, Omarosa, for your service. I wish you continued success. Elsewhere in the Trump administration, 2 nominations to the federal bench have been pulled. One of them we covered on this broadcast, a judicial nominee who had never tried a case in court. And remember, a seat on the federal bench is for life. Brett Talley was rated unanimously unqualified by the American Bar Association, and he failed to disclose he is married to the White House counsel's chief of staff. They have also stood down on the judicial nomination of Jeff Mateer, who had previously described transgender children as evidence of Satan's plan. Coming up after our final break, an emotional moment on live television this morning over something that has bonded together a politician and a politician's daughter from a different political party. We'll have that when we continue. There he is. Last thing before we go here tonight, a major presence is missing from the U.S. Senate this week as one of its best known and most celebrated members is engaged in the fight of his life, and that's saying a lot given his life thus far. John McCain, naval aviator, prisoner of war, United States Senator from Arizona, is in Walter Reed tonight getting his strength back up following aggressive treatment for an aggressive brain tumor. In recent weeks since being diagnosed with glioblastoma, a terminal form of brain cancer, McCain suffered an Achilles tendon tear, and after being given a cumbersome walking boot, he has sometimes depended on a wheelchair to get around Capitol Hill of late, but certainly has not lost his step in terms of his verbal dealings with reporters and colleagues. McCain has been absent for Senate votes for these past 3 days, and word of his hospitalization helped explain an emotional moment this morning on The View, a conversation between Meghan McCain, the senator's daughter, and Joe Biden, who of course lost his son Beau to this same form of brain cancer.
I couldn't get through your book. I tried. Your son Beau had the same cancer that my father was diagnosed with 6 months ago. And I'm sorry.
But there's a lot of hope, babe.
I think about Beau almost every day.
One of the things that gave Beau courage, my word, was John. Your dad, you may remember when you were a little kid, your dad took care of my Beau. Your dad, when he was a mill aide, worked with me, became friends with Bo. And Bo talked about your dad's courage, not about illness, but about his courage. Because I swear, guys, we are going to beat this damn disease. Yeah. We really are.
That was tough stuff to watch this morning. McCain's office, by the way, says the 81-year-old senior senator from Arizona will be back at work before long. That is our broadcast for this Wednesday night. Thank you so very much for being here with us, and good night from NBC News headquarters in New York.